The goal is for people to be able to watch this video and have a quick understanding of the format. So on a scale of 1 to 10, this is my uses. 1 is never play me. A 2 is do your best not to play me, but sometimes you're going to have some 2s in your deck. 3 is filler. Generally, a deck is going to be mostly 3s, and you can still have something good. 4 is above average, something a little bit stronger than filler. 5 is something that's strong. It pulls you into that color. 6, if you're in this color, you will always play this card. 7 is a card that pulls you into the color by itself. 8, make it fit. Splash it. Do what you can to find room for it. And then a 9 is something that you always play. Period. Make it fit. There's going to be some rare artifacts for the first time. I don't have a lot of 9s. 9s are pretty rare. And then 10 is very rare, something that wins the game. Think like Umezawa's Jite. There's a few Planeswalkers. Maybe Crackle with Power. Crackle with Power is probably something I'd put it in an 8. And then I do something slightly different. So I'll have a floor value for a card, which is the worst it will be. Think of it as vanilla. And then the ceiling is the best the card will be. So a lot of cards will be like a 2 a lot of the time, but then in the right archetype, or if it's a build around, then maybe it'll be a 5 or a 6. And then I just have no effort, low effort, medium effort, or high effort to get from the floor to the ceiling or get that card playable. So let's get started. This is a pretty neat step. I did not remove the evil option in Kamigoyf, but today is a little bit different. I will tell you a story a little later. Right now, we're going to be working on, we're working through a set review. So, this is the Brothers' War. Brothers' War is Teferi's gone back in time. Teferi's spirit has gone back in time. And he is at the Brothers' War, which is one of the oldest Magic stories. It is Urza and Mishra fighting, and it's just a sibling rivalry that eventually consumes the world. So Power Stones is one of the main mechanics. Power Stones seem like kind of a throwaway, but they're going to define this limited environment. So there's 14 cards that make Power Stones, 9 at common or uncommon. There's a lot of commons that make it. I'd say they're worth about 3/4 of a card. So they're worth making. They're not quite drawing a card. They're not quite a land. And this wouldn't be the case everywhere. Like when Karn made Power Stones in the last set, they weren't worth 3/4 of a card. Nowadays, in this set, things are a little bit different. So it's just something we're going to have to keep in mind for a lot of these cards, because a lot of this stuff looks like this. So the other new mechanic for the set is called Prototype. And a prototype is the opposite of Kicker. And so Kicker in the last set would, like, Phyrexian Espionage was 2 and a blue to draw 2 cards, and then you could kick it to make your opponent discard a card. Phyrexian Fleshgorger and other cards with Prototype are the opposite. You have to have, by which I mean you have to have that color early on. So in Phyrexian Espionage, it was a blue card, and then you would kick it with black mana. In this one, you have to have the black mana first, and then you can use the artifact mana later. This is a really good use of Power Stone. So it's 7 CMC. If you have 7 Power Stones, you just cast the Fleshgorger. But this card, so the difference between the rare and mythic prototype cards versus the common and uncommon type cards is, like, if you open a Phyrexian Fleshgorger, you're going to play that even if you don't have black mana. That's a great 7-drop. So a 7 mana 7/5 with Menace and Lifelink. Ward equal to Phyrexian Fleshgorger's power. So that's still good. But a lot of the common and uncommon prototype cards, you're only going to play when you can cast both halves of them. So the Phyrexian Fleshgorger prototype, this card is phenomenal. This is probably not the best example that I could use because this is the most powerful prototype card. It's another thing we're going to have to keep in mind a lot, because this is often how you're going to be finishing the game. This is how you close out a game. The other mechanics in the set are Meld, but that's so rare we're going to talk about it as we get to it, and Unearth, which is a lot more common, but is best evaluated on a card-by-card basis. So Unleash says you pay the cost, you return from your graveyard to play, it gains haste, and not Unleash, Unearth. You pay the cost, return from your graveyard to play, and it gains haste, and then in return you exile it. So in previous sets, like in Alara, it was shambling zombies who would surge back to life for one last push. And in this, it's more of a archaeology theme. Unearth is very archaeology based, and you will use it to, like, excavate a creature. It's pretty neat, but it's best on a card-by-card basis. So let me turn the chat back on. Why is it so faded? Let me turn the chat up so that we can see it a little bit better. Filters. Oh, chat overlay. Sorry, 1 second. I don't know why I can't make the chat a little bit more legible. So we're going to get into it. All right, so I'm going to pause it at 14:06. Hang on. How do I fix this? Why can't we see the chat? Damn it. There we go. All right, sorry about that. Hey, all right, now you should be able to see the chat just fine. All right, so we're going to leave that up there, and the rest of the review is going to look like this. So, should make everything legible. So, I talked about the multicolored cards first because they tend to be... Hey! So I talked about the multicolored cards first because they tend to be good indicators of how the set is going to play out. So red-green doesn't have as much of an archetype as the others. It tends to be flexible and efficient. You want beaters down and you want to hit them. So Airblast Engineers is a 5. So I'm not going to... Oh, I forgot to mention, I'm not going to read the cards this time. I realize that you can read the cards, and it will cut things down significantly. It'll be a lot faster if I just talk about the cards. All right, so overall, this is a 5. The floor is a 5. The ceiling is a 5, because this card is always good. It's always going to do what you want it to. So sometimes you're going to have to ping something. It kills 27% of the creatures in the set with 1 damage just on that ping. Your worst case scenario on this card is a 3-cost 3/3 with trample and haste. It only has a trample for 1 turn, but like a 3-mana 3/3 is still pretty good in this set. You want to be efficient. Or you can make a Power Stone. We talked earlier about how a Power Stone is 75% of the card, of a card, but Power Stones are also better in the early game. And there's not a lot of great ways to make them for 3 mana. There are a few, but this ramps you up to 5 pretty easily. Let me scooch a little bit. There we go. I do like this card. Make this a little bit bigger. There we go. I don't want you to see the option of notes. Sorry, I had this figured out earlier, and then I had to remake the scene, which took a minute. All right, moving on. We are on the blue-green archetype. So, blue-green turns all of your creatures... Battery Bearer turns all of your creatures into Power Stones, and there's a lot of artifact spells with CMC 6 or greater. So, at a 4-mana 3/4, this is a pretty solid body, so I gave it a 5. The floor is a 5. It's got a high floor, but if you are in a solidly prototype deck, there's a lot of good uncommon giant creatures, and this turns all of your tiny creatures into things that let you cast giant creatures, even the things that you prototype. So if you play a creature for cheap, lets you ramp pretty good. This card is very strong, and blue-green ramp is going to be a pretty strong deck. I think black is the strongest color overall in this format, but blue-green might be the strongest color combination. It's pretty easy to grab your prototypes. So what Battery Bearer does is a lot of the prototypes are like colored mana on the front end and their colorless mana on the back end. Well, Battery Bearer lets you sort of ignore that front end. It's okay to not have the colored mana to cast those creatures it lets you run off-color prototypes. It's a pretty cool card, and if you get to draw 1 card off of this, you've got so much value off of it. It's a medium effort. You have to build around it a little bit, but even if it's just a 3-mana 3/4, it's really solid. There's a lot of good uses for that mana. Evangel of Synthesis, I gave it a 4. The floor is a 4 because a 2-mana 2/3 is just solid, and it's a 2-mana 2/3 that loots when it comes in. So blue-black cares about drawing 2 or more cards in a turn. So Evangel of Synthesis becomes a 3/3 menace attacker if you draw 2 or more cards in a turn, and it's very easy. There's so many cards that let you draw a second card at 3 mana. We'll go over a lot of them today. So this card's solid. It's a little more aggressive than the others, and it's got a high floor. By the way, most of the multicolored cards are going to be very strong. There's only 10 multicolored uncommons in the set. All right, Philology Vanguard. This is a little weaker than the others, but it has a very high ceiling. It's got first strike. 4 mana 2/3 is not great stats. It's a little fragile. There's a lot of deal threes, but it does enable a lot of attacks. So if you play one creature and then it pumps itself, it attacks pretty hard as a 4/3 attacker with first strike. It takes some work and is really good with unearthed creatures, but it's got a high ceiling. This is a pretty solid build around card. You give it a nice stack of creatures. There's a few things that make multiple creatures and tokens even at instant speed. So the floor is a little lower than the other uncommons, but it's got a really high ceiling. This can be the best card in your deck, but put some thought into it when you're building your red-white aggro deck. Red's a little weaker, but white's very strong. Hero of the Dunes. Floor is a 4, ceiling is a 6. I gave it a 6. It's usually going to be at the ceiling because the white-black mechanic is creatures with and artifacts with converted mana cost 3 or less. Mana value 3 or less now. At common and uncommon, in artifacts and creatures, there are 38 cards that Hero of the Dunes hits. You will almost always be able to return something on turn 5. There's lots of self-mill, but there's also just 3 mana creatures that will die. You do have to be a little careful, because if you're building your deck with lots of big prototypes, so like the white-black prototypes, there's lots of 2 and 3 mana prototypes that are like 6 and 7 mana creatures, and Hero of the Dunes can't return those. But it is a very good Lord and little piece of value. On average is going to be a 5 mana 5/4, which is fine, but it will almost always return something. Just be a little careful. So the effort here is less in the deck building and more in the play style. So you want to try and play it when they don't have a way to exile your graveyard in response or kill Hero of the Dunes on a key turn. It is itself a little fragile. 2 toughness is very low. Black-red Junkyard Genius. So the black-red archetype is sacrifice. You are sacrificing artifacts or creatures. Usually it is some combination of them. Most of the cards with sack outlets let you sacrifice artifacts or creatures, and that's awesome because you can sacrifice your power stones. So Junkyard Genius lets you pump your team for 3 mana, even if it's just a power stone. And also we talked about how a 3 mana source of power stones is strong on its own. I think there are 4 sack outlets in red and black, 4 repeatable sack outlets. So you want to be generating power stones and you want to be playing a lot of creatures, and Junkyard Genius supports both of those in black and red. Skyfisher Spider. I gave this a 6. It's really good. A 4 mana 3/3 with a reach is good. So I gave it a 6 with a floor of a 4 and a ceiling of a 6, and it's medium effort, but the black-green self-mill deck is going to be very powerful. So there's 5 cards. There's a card in each color that is cheap, that mills you, and there's also a lot of looting and a lot of rummaging. But sacrificing a creature to destroy any permanent is great. There's lots of little tokens. There's lots of cards that generate value when they come in or when they die. And there's lots of really big creatures that you have to kill or you'll lose. There's also a lot of small flyers that Skyfisher Spider just blocks. And if you're against aggro, it does gain a big chunk of life. So if it dies with like 4 creatures in your graveyard, that's not uncommon. And you know there's going to be one because you just sacked one. But it's pretty often that this is a 4 mana 3/3, kill a non-land permanent, gain 4 life. Very strong. I gave it... So it's a medium effort in the deck building, but usually when you play this card, it's going to be at a 6, and if you can cast this card, it's going to be a 4. Even if it's just a 4 cost 3/3 with reach, it's still pretty good. This is one of the better uncommons. Third Path Iconoclast. So this is also a great uncommon, but for a different reason. Floor is a 3, ceiling is a 6, because you don't want to play this as a 2 mana 2/1, but if you get 1 colorless soldier token out of it, and it makes colorless soldier artifacts for non-creature spells. It's a lot of non-creature spells. It's pretty easy to pick up non-creature spells as you need them. There are 12 cantrips or like pseudo cantrips in this set that trigger Third Path Iconoclast, and also lots of stuff that loots. You will make a lot of bodies. If you play this on turn 2, you'll get a body out of it. If you play this on turn 5, you'll get a body that turn. Then if you untap with it, you will make a lot more. And this isn't a card that triggers only once each turn, like so many of the cards that do this lately. It triggers on every non-creature spell. So even if you have a pile of artifacts that draw cards when they come in, Third Path Iconoclast is going to make a 1/1 on all of them, and it makes and their artifacts and their soldiers, all of which are relevant. It's a very strong card. It's going to be worth splashing for. Don't always treat it like a 2-drop. There's a lot of uses for this guy. He's a cool monk. All right. Yoshin Dissident. This card I gave a 6 with a floor of a 4 and a ceiling of a 6 for almost exactly the same reasons as the previous card. Medium effort. You do need to fill your deck with artifacts, but it doesn't have to be... They don't have to be cast. They just come in. For instance, every time third pass Iconoclast makes a 1/1 artifact soldier, Yoshin Dissident grows a creature. If you grow this card one time, it is on rate. It's a 2-mana 2/2. If you grow it 5 times, you're going to win the game. It's very good. I gave it a ceiling of a 6, and you're usually going to have it at a 6, just 2 or 3. All right, up next we have Yoshin Tactician. Green-white is just artifacts coming in and leaving. Yoshin Tactician, very simple, a 3/4 that pumps soldiers. It's a Soldier Lord. There's white-blue is in theory soldiers, but soldiers are pretty evenly spread across every color. Right, Herrick? It's not that much harder to play because it's only 2 mana. But Yoshin Tactician is a... so it's usually going to be a 4. Ceiling of it is a 5. It's a little... So, like, if on the previous 2 cards, Yoshin Dissident and Third Path Iconoclast, if they kill it after it comes down, you will have all the counters left over or the bodies left over. Yoshin Tactician is scary, but once they kill it, it's dead. It doesn't gain value when it comes in. It's still a solid body, and it's easy to splash for. You're going to end up splashing one color of this often. If you are white-black, it's worth splashing blue for the Lord. If you are white-green, it's worth splashing blue for the Lord. If you are blue-red, it's worth splashing white for the Lord. Because even though white-blue, in theory, has the most soldiers, there's 32 soldiers in the set, and they're spread across all the colors. So that is it for the multicolored cards. We've got 3 lands, at common and uncommon. First up is Demolition Field. There are 6 hits in this set for Demolition Fields, and 5 of them are rare. Because... you'll sight it in some out of the time. It's usually bad. Don't bother with it. This is a constructed card. It is Field of Ruin exactly. Evolving Wilds is solid. You're going to take Evolving Wilds anytime there's nothing else that actively improves your deck. It's fine in a monocolor deck. It's fine in a 2-color deck. It's fine for splashing your 3rd and 4th color. And splashing is something you're going to see a lot of in this format. We've seen Evolving Wilds before. There's a lot less fixing in this set than in Dominaria United. And it's kind of cool. I do want to point out that Evolving Wilds, like, it is happening across the globe during this set. It just so happens that there's a lot of raising of the land going on in the Brothers' War in order to pay for their war. It's a cool card. It's cool flavor in this set. Takeja's Dig Site. This is a cool card. So I gave it a 3 with a floor of 2 and a ceiling of 4, and it's just a land that makes waste and surveils. So in a lot of sets, this card would be amazing. But in this set, even monocolored decks want basic lands. So you'll run it often, but it's going to be most at home in 2-color decks or monocolored decks that are missing key uncommons, which we will talk about in each color. It's a really cool card. Because it's a cool card because it's not busted. Like, a land that surveils could have been busted and has been in a lot of sets. It's very cool. All right, so that's it for the lands. Does anybody have any questions before I move on? I wanted to do white, black, red, green, blue, and then artifacts today. So slightly different order than normal. Music. You like music. All right, so moving on to white. Oh, really quick, there are a lot of artifacts in this set with colored components. The colored components, I tried to sort them based on whether you need that colored component to play that card. Because some stuff, like, it'll have an unearth cost of white and 3, and you'll still play that card in non-white decks. It's worth running a little bit of fixing to make it work. There are going to be some cards that you may consider white that are missing from this part, and they will be in the artifact section at the end, because I want to talk about them in relation to all of the decks and not just this one. Drinking water. All right, so Aeronaut Cavalry. It's a 5-mana 3/4 is kind of a weird rate, and it ends up being a 5-mana 4/5 with flying a lot of the time. You should assume that you have soldiers to put counters on. It's not that hard. You don't need to have a soldier deck for this card to be good. It's usually going to be a 3. It's kind of interesting in this set specifically because this set is going to be divided into mid-game or early game, mid-game, late game pretty cleanly. So there's not a... So it's more extreme than usual. Usually, it's not such a clean divide between early, mid, and late game. So the early game is going to be spent putting down threats, getting damage in, maybe generating some card advantage and generating power stones. And the mid game is where you have a few power stones to use for various things, maybe sacrifice, maybe pay an ability here and there. And the late game is going to be when you have enough power stones to start doing your unearthing and putting out these huge creatures. And the game will feel it'll feel like a very abrupt shift because suddenly your opponent is playing 8 drops, 10 drops, 12 drops. And so Aeronaut Cavalry is how white is going to capture the mid game. It's bigger than most things that blue puts down, and it attacks through most threats in the air. So you'll end up stabilizing, and then you'll put down this 5 mana 4/5. It's not the best mid-game card, but you need some cards that are for the mid-game. You need cards that come down on turn 5 or 6 that block for a turn and then start either pushing damage or stay back to keep blocking to further your game plan. So Aeronaut Cavalry has a place. I gave it a 3 as a filler, but you're going to need some amount of cards at this cost for this effect. Airlift Chaplain. So this is part of a cycle of creatures that mill 3 and then either pick up a card, or mill X, and then either pick up a specific type of card from your graveyard, or have a counter. So Airlift Chaplain is either going to pick up a creature card or a plains card or be a Windrake. And the fact that it is all 3 is excellent. So like it's a little weird in that this won't ever get you a 4-drop. You're never going to play Airlift Chaplain, pick up a 4-drop, and then have your turn 4 play, but you will often want a Windrake. You will often want a 4th land. You will often want a just another creature, and the options are really valuable on this. And there's also a lot of leftover value in a 3-mana 1/1 with flying. There's a lot of good ways to power it up. It's not a soldier, but that body that it leaves behind, even if you pick up a card and don't put the counter on it, is still very relevant in the game. I think it's really solid. It's a bread and butter common for white. Okay, so Ambush Paratrooper. Very cool card. Very cool combat trick. So if you play this on turn 2, you might get to sneak in a 1/1, a block on a 1/1. There's not a ton of 1/1 attackers unless they don't grow like the Airlift Chaplain. But sometimes you'll get a free block out of it with a flash. Usually, this is another options card. So if you play this card on turn 2, you can get some damage in with your flyer and block. 5 to give your creatures +1/+1 seems like a lot. In the last set, it was a lot. There was Charismatic Captain, I think, was 5 to give your team pump your team. You can pay in Power Stones. So it seems like 5. It's not going to be 5. You're going to want to play a lot of Power Stones to make this card good. You don't need a lot. Like if you have 3 Power Stones, then it's 2 mana to pump your team. If you have 5 Power Stones, then then it'll pump your team. But like you'll have situations where you only have 4 lands and your opponent attacks, and you put down the Paratrooper and pump on defense. This effect is normally good only on offense. It's fantastic on defense and offense. I'm going to be picking this card pretty high. The floor is a 2 because you need to put some work in to make this card work, but there's so many different directions where you can put that work in. If you're just attacking with creatures and going wide, card's great. If you are maxing out on soldiers, card's great. If you are maxing out on Power Stones, card's great. But you do need a direction. All right, Calamity's Wake. This is more of a constructed card. It exiles all graveyards and stops the spell for a turn and then exiles itself. It's not usually going to be worth it, but if you are in a best of 3 event, or if you're at your pre-release, know that you have it, because sometimes people are going to pile up their unearthed cards, and they're going to be the black-green mill deck. So the black-green self-mill deck has a lot of trouble against this card. It's not going to be worth main decking, but know that you have it. It's a good sideboard card, and I do tend to give grades of high to the sideboard cards. Okay, Combat Thrasher. This one's a doozy. It's... You do want to be able to pay both halves of the prototype cost, but at its worst, it's a 1/1 double striker that draws a card when it comes in. And that's not cast. That's comes in for any reason. A 1/1 double striker wears equipment well, it wears pump spells well. It's scary. If you attack into a 1/1, it beats it. There's a lot of 2/1s and 3/1s in this format that Combat Thrasher just beats. Card's great. It is worth noting that if you are like a dedicated Power Stone deck, you're still going to play Combat Thresher even without white. I'll talk later when we get to the artifacts about how I think white is going to be the most splashed color because of cards like this. But it's a good card overall. Like it's neither half is a great rate, but it always replaces itself and it's always a relevant body. Pump spells are also, so this might be a 3 or a 4 in other sets. In this set, the pump spells are good, really good. There's a lot of really good pump spells, and Combat Thresher wears them all so well. I can't do Toho right now. It's too... Toho gives me Toho flashbacks. All right, moving on. Deadly Riposte. So I gave this a 2. It only deals 3 damage, which it does kill 69% of the creatures in the format, but this is a very defensive card. So if you are building a defensive white deck, which there is going to be a strong defensive white deck, then Deadly Riposte is great. Give it, like, that's when it's that 4, but you don't want to first pick a Deadly Riposte. You don't want to pick it even if I first pick a Combat Thresher and then an Airlift Chaplain, I still don't know what kind of white deck I'm going to have. So I gave it a low ranking because you're picking it late, not because it's necessarily bad. You're going to have lots of decks where it's like, I need a way to stop this creature from killing me. I need a way, I just need to gain a little life. But it is a fantastic defensive card. It's just you don't know until pretty late whether or not you're going to be defensive. It's also a... There's nothing that combos with it. There's no good like Law Rune Mage. There's no good way to tap the other creatures. All right, Disenchant. So I was looking through the set. I think I need to come up a little bit on Disenchant. I think the floor is a little higher. I think the ceiling is a little higher. I think it's still going to average at 3, but there's a lot of targets, and they're not just artifacts. So there's 75 artifacts and 20 enchantments, but what I realize is that 2 of the white removal spells, one at common, one at uncommon, and 1 of the blue removal spells at common are binding enchantments. So being able to hit your opponents, every card you need to hit with Disenchant is important. Like, maybe I should even come up to a 4 on Disenchant. I'm going to come up to a 4 on Disenchant. It's like Destroy Evil in the last set. Destroy Evil didn't hit everything, but everything that Destroy Evil hit was a card that failing to kill would cost you the game. And that's how Disenchant is. Like, your opponent will spend 7 on a Combat Thresher, and you'll be able to Disenchant and play another spell in the same turn. It's very... We'll talk more about Disenchant when we get to other auras that matter. But everybody's going to be playing targets for this, and they're always going to be important. Do be careful on how many Disenchants you're running. Because if you have a playset of Disenchants, that might be too many. But 2, maybe 3 is the sweet spot. All right, Great Desert Prospector. So here, I think this is our first disparity so far. This is really good in the right deck. It's kind of awkward because if you are an aggro deck, then a 5-mana 3/2 is not great. And if you are a control deck, you're not likely to have a big pile of creatures out. But if you can make both of those things happen, card's great. If you get 3 Power Stones out of a Great Desert Prospector, that ramps you to 9 mana on turn 6. And that's relevant when we get to the artifacts. There's a lot of good 9-mana artifacts. So take this card, don't first pick it. When you have cards that you want to cast, when you have your Sawtooth, when you have your Combat Threshers, when you have, well, we'll talk, we have a lot of other prototypes to get to. That's when Great Desert Prospector is good. Even if you're a deck like Ambush Paratrooper, if you have 5 creatures in play and you make 5 Power Stones, that's a free Ambush Paratrooper activation every turn. Great Desert Prospector is a really cool card. I love the design on him. Hello, beautiful. Very cool. It's going to be interesting to play with and it's terrifying to play against, but it's also going to be a dead card some amount of the time. So be careful. All right, Lay Down Arms. This is a high effort card and is part of a cycle of 5 cards that care about having a number of basic lands. So often in this set, you're going to be... This is a 2-color set, but sometimes your colors are going to be white artifact or black artifact, and those artifacts will fill out your other color. So Lay Down Arms requires a lot of planes. Unlike the others, it's a lot... You're fine playing this if you have 3 planes in play. So like some of the cards, like Corrupt is in this set, Blanchwood Armor, you want 5, 6, 7 forests or swamps before that card is strong. Lay Down Arms, I'd say, is strong at 3, 4 planes. Even on turn 2, playing it on Plains is solid. It is a more controlling white card. It's not great in aggro because it does give 3 life and it's sorcery speed, but it's reasonable removal and it is a good payoff for being white artifact deck. If it's higher on, like if you pack one, pick one, lay down arms, that's pretty reasonable because you can draft around it. But you'll get late game laydown arms. So like I made the note of a higher first pick because if you pack one, pick one to lay down arms, and then take a white card, and then a white card, and then a white card, then people are going to start passing you lay down arms. And if you're mono white with 3 to 4 lay down arms, you're going to be winning. But like a lay down arms deck would be the deck for the Great Desert Prospector. All right, Lauren. So I think that this is up there for best white uncommon. I think it's actually second best, but she's so cool. All right, so there are 24 legendary creatures in this set, not counting like the meld cards. But if she only picks up one artifact card, then she's gotten her value back. A 4-mana 3/3 that picks up an artifact card we've seen be good a lot in past sets. But all the legends are good. Like, you'll pick her after first picking a rare legend. You'll splash for her often. She grinds a lot of value, and this is a really value-heavy format, especially because of the way things tend to play out. You're going to have lots of games where you play your Combat Thresher on turn 3, play a normal game, attack, it'll die, and then you'll pick him up in the very late game with Lauren, and then recast him for 7 mana. So it converts these prototypes into full monsters. Lauren's very strong in this. She's better than she would be in other sets, and this is normally a very strong effect. Lauren's Escape. I'm glad she got out, because I would feel very guilty if she died. There's a lot of good artifact sack synergies. And she's a little awkward. Like, you'll splash her in like black-red. Black-red is going to be a weird one. We'll watch that archetype. So now we're on Lauren's Escape. Removal and creatures tend to be encompassing in this format. So this is a good card. You do want, I gave it a medium effort and a ceiling of 3, because it's usually going to be a 3. But you need to already have things that are worth protecting, like Lauren. Lauren is a good one to protect. But it's awkward because, like, you don't want to protect the Combat Thresher on 3, you want to protect the Combat Thresher on 7. So the Power Stones will let you often play your 7-mana artifact, and then Lauren's Escape it in the same turn. So it's a little easier to hold up mana for tricks like this. And normally cards that, like, give a creature +2/+2, like Massive Might, are really good because you can Massive Might in response to an Abrade to keep your creature alive. That's not the case in this set. There's not a lot of destroy target creature with power 4 or greater, or power, like, destroy target, like, cut down style effects. Destroy creatures that are smaller. So Lauren's Escape is solid interaction. It plays like God's Willing a lot of the time. It doesn't force through an attacker, but it does. This is a reasonable trick. Just make sure you have creatures you want to protect with Lauren's Escape. That's why it's a 3, not because it's not something you don't want to play. It's not something you want to play. It's a 3 because you want to pick it late. You want to pick it after you already got your. It's more important to have the creatures you want to protect than it is to have the protection. All right, mass production. This is a cool one. I'm going to be revisiting this one later. It just makes 4 soldiers, and that's really good if you have ways to keep them alive. They are all artifacts, so this is not a card that is good on its own. I still gave it a 4. You have to have things that work with mass production. It is very good if you have those things. I don't know how hard it's going to be to get those things, but this is also a splashable card. So like if you are a black-red go-wide deck that sacrifices artifacts, you can splash your mass production pretty easily, and it'll do what you want it to do. I like this card. The effort's a little high. Like, what you don't want is to pay 6 mana for 4 chump blockers for your opponent's massive threat. You want to play 6 mana for 4 creatures and be proactive with them. You want to try and win the game on turns. If you play mass production on turn 6, you want to try and win the game on turn 7, 8, or 9. So this is more of a build around than it looks, but it's always going to be solid. Right? This is a cool card. Like, 4 bodies for 1 card, solid. I like it. Like a song. All right, up next. This card is cool. I went back and forth on this one a lot. This card probably took me 10 minutes to evaluate. All right, so all of the extra text, it just picks up a creature, or a permanent, not a creature. But all of the extra text is just so that if an unearthed creature is exiled instead of anywhere else, then the exile trigger can't replace an exile. So it exiles it and then picks it up. So this can grind a lot of value. So if you unearth a creature and then pick up the unearthed creature, then you can cast it, play it normally, let it die, and then unearth it again. You can only activate it during your turn, but it's not limited to sorcery speed. This is a build around. There are a full 70 permanents with enter the battlefield effects in this set. 70. That's a third of the set. If you pick this first pick or second pick, you can build around it and it's going to be very strong. I'm going to be first picking this card often to build around it, but like even we're only in the first, I don't know, 20% of the set, and we've already seen 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So in our like, and plus all of the multicolored cards. And even if you just have something like whenever you cast a non-creature spell, make a 1/1. Whenever an artifact comes into play, put a counter on something. You are still going to be able to get value out of this card. And it seems expensive, but that's not 1 white and 2. That is 1 white and 2 power stones to pick up a permanent. And it can still target itself, which means if they disenchant it on your turn, then you can pick it up yourself. So like this card with something that cares about non-creature spells will pick up itself and recast it for one white. Very good. It looks clunky. It will play better than it looks. That's just good advice. Remember, students, if it's glowing, humming, or whirring, don't touch it. We're the opposite as players. All right, military discipline. I gave it a 2 with a floor of 2 and a ceiling of 3. It's pretty low effort. It's a fine trick, but there's better tricks. It's better if you have other tricks. +1/+0 is just a pretty minor effect. You'll sight it in a lot of the time when you have relatively equal creatures in size. Very interesting. Not usually what you want. It doesn't keep your creature alive unless you are crashing into another creature. But this is a weird set for crashing a creature into another creature. That being said, there are a good number of cheap Death Touchers. So this is a combo card with Death Touch creatures. If you have enough cheap Death Touchers, they're mostly a common and uncommon. This card gets a lot better. So this is best in green white or black white or even a black white green deck, but still it's a substitute for removal. You want actual removal instead. So if you don't have enough removal, then you're fine grabbing this card and putting on your Death Touchers, but that's not the goal. Phalang's Vanguard. So I gave this a 3 because a 2-mana 2/2 with Vigilance is fine, and sometimes you will be able to explosively hit them. If you are building a solid, like it is a soldier, so you can build a strong white aggro deck with a pile of Phalang's Vanguards and make it bigger. But even if it's a 3/2 or a 4/2 or a 5/2, it still just dies to your opponent's 2/2s. And there's a lot more just normal 2-power creatures in this set. And normally this card might be a little better because you could like instant speed make a Power Stone to trade up, but there's a big gap. There's a jump from that 2 and 3 and 4 power creature to that 10 mana 10/10 in this set. So it's a little weaker than it usually is, but you need 2 drops and it's going to fill that role often. Power Stone Engineer. I think this guy, so this is the bread and butter 2-drop. Also, it's not the card that's out of focus. It's the art in the card that's out of focus, which is kind of cool because he's a background style character. But this is one of the few 2-mana ways to make a Power Stone, and he does have to die. But this is a great card to recur. Like, this is one of the reasons that the Phalang's Vanguard is only a 3, because you're going to be trading your Power Stone Engineer with their Phalang's Vanguard and making a Power Stone token. And that's worth 3/4 of a card, but it's worth more earlier. The earlier you make that Power Stone, the stronger it is. It's a cool card. I really like this one. I'm going to be picking it really high out of white. All right, moving on, we have Prison Sentence. So this is just Arrest with Scry 2. And Scry 2 is also worth about 3/4 of a card. Turning off activated abilities is relevant in this set, and dealing with bigger creatures is relevant in this set. Card's pretty strong. I would give it... This in other sets, this card would have been much higher, but this is a set where people can main deck Disenchant, and not just Disenchant, but Disenchant effects. There's a lot of cards that will destroy target artifact or enchantment, or exile target artifact or enchantment. Most cards have a way to deal with this card, a way to sacrifice the creature, a way to blink the creature, a way to kill the Prison Sentence. Just be careful with how you play with this card. You do need them. Take your first one high, you have to be able to disable creatures. But like in the contest of prison sentence versus disenchant, I will sometimes take the disenchant. The first prison sentence, I will take over the first disenchant because of the scry 2. But if this were just arrest, I would take disenchant over prison sentence often. It's a pretty cool card. I gave it a floor of 4, and it's always going to be at least a 4 with a ceiling of 6 because sometimes you're going to have to take it higher when you need that removal. Sure thing, Dragon Jack. I want this to be something people can go back to and just like jump to the right card to talk about. How you doing today? All right, Recommission. This is a cool card. This is a pretty high disparity between the floor and the ceiling. You want targets for this. So there's a lot of good rares that cost 3, 2, or 1, and you want those targets first. But recommissioning the right creature will make a huge difference. Even picking up like a cheap flyer, something like this Airlift Chaplain, is really good. Like you can pick up an Airlift Chaplain and it'll be a 3/3 flyer, or you can pick up an Airlift Chaplain and it will enable further recommissions and also draw you another card. So like the white-black CMC 3 or less deck is solid, and this is fantastic in that deck. But have your targets first. Recruitment Officer. This is the highest rating I've ever given to a 1-drop that wasn't a rare. It's so good. It's a 2/1 attacker on turn 1, and like 2/1 attackers have been almost playable for years. Just almost. But there's so many X2s, 3/2s, and 4/2s that this card trades with. If you play it on turn 1, you'll get 6 points of damage in before you start activating it to draw cards, and it draws a lot of cards. It's best in that deck, but 4 mana to draw a card on your 1 mana 2/1 is fantastic. Keeping 4, that's an impulse. This is a 1 mana 2/1 that impulses, and yeah, you're limited on what you can impulse for, but you just have to build around it. It's really good. I gave it a floor of 3 and a ceiling of 5 and a rating of 5. But if you build around it, it'll win games. Soldier Tribal is fantastic. Like, I think Soldier Tribal is tier 1 in standard, and it's pretty good in this set. All right, Repair and Reforge. I gave this a 2 with a floor of a 2 and a ceiling of 6, but it's solid. So the thing about Repair and Recharge, you want to already have the 8 drops. So like this is part of an archetype set because it doesn't return creatures. It returns artifacts, enchantments, and planeswalkers. And sometimes you'll get back a removal spell like the Arrest, and make a Power Stone. And sometimes you'll get back, if you're lucky, you'll get back a planeswalker. Sometimes you'll get back a big prototype creature. Like often you'll have situations where, I know this is just the only prototype creature I've shown so far. So Combat Thresher, you'll play it as a 3 mana 1/1 that draws a card and attacks. And then it'll die because it's only a 1/1. And then you'll pick it up with Repair and Recharge and make a Power Stone and draw a card and have a 3/3 double striker. Card is solid, but it's work. You gotta put in some work for this one. If you want to first pick it, go for it, but you'll have to put in the work to get that up to a 6. Ideally, you want to already have some cards. Reanimation is solid because of how the prototype creatures will play. This is a 3. Like, I don't want people to be discouraged from picking this card because of the work that goes into making it play well. Because if you get this to play well, it's going to feel really strong. All right, moving on. Static Net. This is the best white uncommon in the set. It's pretty close between this and Lauren, but exiling is relevant. And this is a removal spell that gains life and makes a Power Stone at a relevant time. So 4 is the last time that making a Power Stone is going to feel like ramp. All the other times is going to feel like an enabler. And so the difference is that it lets you cast your 6-drop a turn earlier if you Static Net on turn 4. If you Static Net on turn 8, it's still great. We saw with Prayer of Binding, like Flash is important, but just having 2 life tacked onto your removal spell keeps you alive in situations where you might otherwise die. And this also makes a relevant Power Stone. It almost, like, this is worth 2 cards. This is a removal spell that is worth 2 cards most of the time because it deals with their biggest threat, which will often be huge, and leaves a Power Stone and gains some life. It's great. First card with effort of none. It's always going to be good. All right, Survivor of Corliss. This might just be... So the floor of this card is actually a 1. It's weird. So a 1/1 first strike blocks a reasonable number of things. 29%, I believe. Hang on, I wrote it down. It blocks 27% of creatures plus tokens at first strike, and then it scries 2 a little later. It's not quite good enough. If you are a heavy soldier tribal deck, go for it. It's solid in that deck, but it is hard to make work otherwise, especially because like we've seen already so many cards where being in the graveyard is relevant. And the fact that you have to exile to scry 2 is actually like scrying 2 is good. Being able to turn it into a scry 2 late in the game is solid, but if you're just chump blocking and scrying 2, that's not worth a card. So it's a lot weaker than the other cards we've seen so far. Especially because you can't pick it up with all of your things that return CMC 3 or less. That being said, if you're like a mono white with a light black splash deck, this has a place. It's some work, but it has a place. All right, Thopter Architect. This is a sweet card. It's a mid-game finisher. So like if you are an aggro deck, then this is a way to take over the middle of the game, to push all those extra points of damage through by just making Power Stones and giving things flying. You can also give huge things flying in the late game or use instant speed Power Stone generators to give something flying as a surprise blocker. This card has utility. It's usually just going to be a 3, but if you are willing to put some work into setting up situations for creative blocks or need that flying, the card is solid. No, but it does repair Thopters. She'll only fly once. So I guess the flavor on this is the very first Thopter that Urza and Mishra make crashes because it's based on the Wright brothers a little bit. But like they're still really excited, and then eventually they just keep repairing that Thopter until they make their own. So like this has a place. It's pretty cool. It should make Thopters. There's a few cards that make Thopters. All right, so you get into the third path. You draw a card, you gain some life. It's kind of weird because a lot of these cards, like if this said gains 4 life, draw a card, it would be better because you could draw it off the top of your deck in the late game. But for this card to be good, you want it to be good on turn 3, which means you have something good on turn 2. It's a little bit awkward in general, but a lot of the decks that want to play a non-sorcery, a non-creature cantrip will want this card because it also keeps them alive until the late game. So it has a place, and some decks are going to want it badly, but pick it up on the table. Don't grab it until it wheels. The Wright brothers destroyed a plane after inventing planes. They also didn't. Maybe if Urza and Mishra had invented their own Thopters, they would have gone down a better path. But they found Phyrexian and Thran Thopters. It was different. All right, Warlords Elite. The design on this card is fantastic. So it does say tap 2 untapped artifact creatures and or lands you control, which means at worst this is going to be a 5 mana 4/4. But if you have 2 Power Stones, it's a 3 mana 4/4. If you have a 1-drop and a 2-drop, it's a 3 mana 4/4. And importantly, this works with all of the CMC 3 or less synergies, even though it's a 5 mana 4/4. So I think it's best in that deck. It's best when you can curve out. And you can also twin spell it in the late game. It's usually going to be just fine. On average, it'll be a 4 mana 4/4, which technically has a mana value of 3. It's pretty cool. It's not overpowered or crazy. Being 4 toughness is relevant. This will see a lot of play. I should probably... Like, it's always just going to be a 4/4. But I think the ceiling is a little higher than I gave it here. So I'll leave it at 3, and I'm raising the ceiling from a 4 to a 5. Okay, Yoshin Frontliner. This is a cool 1-drop. So the danger of having a 1 mana 1/1, even one that pumps another creature, is that they'll just block the 1 mana 1/1. But if they block the 1 mana 1/1, it's not the end of the world. And this is also going to see play in self-mill cards. So like is this really the first Unearth card we've seen? So this is the first Unearth card we've seen. And it's an interesting card because you can get a little extra value out of it through cards like Airlift Chaplain. 3, it's going to be at 2 fairly often, but if you build around it, it's going to be a fine body often without being... I'm going to lower this. It's going to average 2, but in the right deck, you can get it up to a 4. This is a cool soldier. Like, it's an artifact soldier. It goes into any deck. Not any deck, any aggro soldier deck. All right, Yoshin Medic. So a 3-cost 1/4 with lifelink is a fantastic blocker and not much else. It's not a great attacker. If you have good ways to power it up, if you have things that care about soldiers, this is a good soldier. Like, this is a good soldier to just give +1/+1 or put a counter on. But it's not going to be good on its own most of the time. So I just gave it a 2. Floor of 2, ceiling of 3. All right, short water break. I'm just gonna drink some water, and then we're gonna move on to black. So I did white first because I think it's a good representation of how the set plays, and then black I think is the strongest color in this set. Hey, Dusam, how you doing? We're just about to start with black. So, Ashnod's intervention. How can they say Ashnod is uncaring when she intervenes like this? She calls Tano's duck. All right, so this is an effect we've been seeing a lot in black, which is when a creature would die, return it. This is better than it's been. We talked earlier about how many creatures have enter the battlefield effects, but this also lets you reset and unearth creatures. So like if we were to unearth that Yoshin Soldier, so like the Yoshin Soldier from before, the 1 mana 1/1, attack with it, pump a creature, hit them, unearth it, attack with it, pump a creature, Ashnod's intervention to trade your creature up, and then instead of being exiled, it goes back to your hand. It's going to save important creatures. There's a lot of good ones. This card is better than it looks, and this effect is better than it has been. It would be a little stronger if it returned to play, but it would be broken if it returned to play. So it's better on cheaper creatures. You don't want to use it on your expensive creatures as much, but there are more relevant cheap creatures too. This is part of the Unearth deck. I should up the amount of effort this is going to take is slightly higher than I have written down. So I think that is the correct ranking. So it's going to be a 3 instead of a 4. But you can get it up to a 4 in the black-white. There's a lot of decks where this card is very good. In the black-red deck and the black-white deck. I also like the flavor of this. This is just Ashnod saving someone. And she gets you out back to the hand, not back to play. All right, Battlefield Butcher. So this is a solid finisher. You don't want to be paying 5 mana to finish them with the Battlefield Butcher, which is why the 2 is floor. But if you get 5 creatures in your graveyard and just tap to drain them 2 every turn, this is a good blocker to go with that. It's something that they have to... That's true, Claw. So the Butcher's a good blocker early and a finisher late, so it's usually going to be something you want in the self-mill deck. But it's fine outside of the self-mill deck because there's a lot of incidental self-mill and there's a lot of creatures just dying. This is going to be a combat-oriented set. There's lots of blockers and invasion and getting creatures down just to hold, and the Butcher is a good way to close out a game, especially in the black-white aggro decks or the black-red aggro decks. Like, it is incidentally good in most color combinations because black-green mill means you can turn it on right away and block. Black-blue control is a good blocker, and you just sit behind the Butcher and your counter spells and drain them 2 every turn. And black-red and black-white are both good at playing the middle, at getting it down to 1 or 2 mana and dealing enough early damage to let it kill them. Right, I like this card. All right, Carrion Locust. It's a 3 mana 2/1 with flying, and you can exile a card, and if it was a creature card, they lose 1 life. Really, that exile is relevant. Being able to exile a creature or any card from a graveyard, because you can exile on Earth to keep them from getting value back. There's a lot of recursion in white, black, and green. Being a flyer is relevant. It's a fine card. You'll end up playing in your 3-drop slot a lot, but it's not going to be the only 3-drop you want. It's pretty solid all around. I consider it during review and I make feedback. So like if one of you says this card is bad or this card is good and makes a very good point in the chat, I will change the review right here. So, and the way this is going to work is as soon as I finish this review, I will start the upload process to YouTube and start converting this over to a spreadsheet that anyone can look at. But if there's a card where it's like, you only gave Carrion Locust a 3, it's a Windrake with upside. So I actually went back. I had Carrion Locust at a 2 until I finished the spoiler, and I'm like, oh, exiling cards from graveyards is very relevant. And there's not a ton of ways to do it. So I upped it a bit because it was a floor of 2, a ceiling of 3 with an average of 2. But on average, that exile is going to be worth half a card. So that I bumped it up. All right, Clay Revenant. This is a card that I love. That's fair years. We can take a look. If you for now, if there's something that you disagree with, please tell me. I would love to talk to you about it. So the Clay Revenant is a 1 mana 1/2. ETB is tapped. It plays like Persistent Specimen, but it comes back to your hand instead of exile. There's a lot of cards that make this card good. They're mostly uncommons and rares. That's why the ceiling of this is high. You don't want to play this generically. Like, you don't want to just put it into your deck as a 1-mana 1/2, because that's not a good blocker. But you can put it back into your hand and discard it over and over again without it ever coming into play. And there's a lot of cards that make that relevant. There's a few cards that make you discard to pay a cost. But like, this just turns looting into card advantage. So it's a pretty good sort of card advantage in blue-black control. But you want to have that looting first. So we're leaving it at a 2 for now, because this will come. You need like the Urza or the Mishra first before you want the Clay Revenant. It's going to be solid in a lot of decks though, just not the aggro ones. All right, Corrupt. So this one has a floor of 2, a ceiling of 6. Now this is a payoff. This is a payoff for being mono black or for being the black artifact decks. You can dome your opponent for 6 or 8 or 10. This is how you finish a game. But it has the deck building requirement that you be essentially mono black, because you really don't want to corrupt for 4. You don't want to corrupt for 3. You don't want to have a game state where you have 3 swamps and 5, islands, or even 5 swamps and 4 islands. This is a mono black card, but if you first pick a corrupt and then you get 3 corrupts, that's a fantastic black deck. Corrupt is just a great finisher. So it's going to average 3. But if you're mono black, it's so good. It is a huge Urborg payoff. It's not relevant right now, but that may change. Maybe we'll get Urborg back. We are on Dominaria right now. All right, Disciples of Gix. This card is so cool. It's usually bad, but you can go get 3 unearthed creatures, put 3 unearthed creatures in your graveyard, or you can go get some creatures to reanimate and reanimate them. There's enough graveyard payoffs, but you do have to build around it. This is a build around uncommon, because a 6-mana 4/4 is not a good enough rate. You can get it up there in the right deck. I don't know that it's better than just milling yourself with commons. This card is great for Commander. I don't know that it's better than there's a lot of common ways to mill yourself. This might not be better than them, but just grabbing 3 unearthed creatures to hit hard 3 times is solid, and it's good with like the Careful Excavation. You can go get 3 unearthed creatures and just turn it into a huge amount of card advantage. It's a cool card. I love the design on it, and also Disciples of Gix are jerks, and Gix is jerks to them in the story. He just like will randomly crush eyes and be like, "Oh, sorry, I crushed your eye. Here's a mechanical eye." It's not great. All right, Disfigure. Disfigure is the worst it's ever been, and it's still fine. It kills 44% of creatures, but the shrinking amount is a lot less than usual. Like, Disfigure has always been good because it'll kill relevant 2-drops, relevant 1-drops, and then let your 5-drop beat their 5-drop. But it won't let your 5-drop beat their 10-drop. So it's a little weird in this one. Oh no, Alu, I'm sorry! Subscribers don't pay for ads. And I'm going to have my subscriber tournament next week, so just as a heads up, that's a good reason to subscribe. I don't usually like requiring people to subscribe, but if you subscribe, you get to enter the tournament for free, and there's good prizes for it, and you won't get ads. All right, that's the last subscriber plug I'll do until the end. All right, so Disfigure is still good. You'll need some number of them, but you don't, like, there have been formats where Disfigure was legal, where you would draft like 6 Disfigures and be really happy. The shrinking is not as relevant as it has been, but it's still playable. And the first copy I'd say is a 4. Oh my god, Raid Shadow Legends. All right, Dreams of Steel and Oil. Love the art on this card. This is better than this effect has been for a while, because you will often get Ostracize is playable. So like things like Duress. Duress is not really a playable card, but your opponent has to run creatures, and if your opponent doesn't have creatures, we'll talk more when we get to the artifacts. There's a lot of artifacts that turn into creatures, and those will be how you actually finish the game. So Dream of Steel and Oil will usually have a hit. And if you draw it over the top of your deck in the late game, exiling the creature from their graveyard is relevant. Sometimes you'll get to hit an unearthed creature and a regular creature, which isn't quite a 2-for-1, but it's a 1.5 for 1. Card's solid. Sometimes it's great. Have it ready for your sideboard. Main deck it in Sealed. That's the biggest difference between draft and Sealed. This card is going to be worth running in your main deck at your pre-release. Maybe not when you draft it. I don't think this is insane late game, because your opponent is more likely to have an artifact in their hand or a creature in their hand than usual. But like usually, like turn 1, this card is insane. But if you draw it off your deck in the late game, you're just going to exile a card from your graveyard, and that's not going to be ideal. Um, it is good. I think it's solid, but I don't think like being a good, reasonable card puts it at a 3. All right, Dredging Claws. This is so I actually went back and upped this from a 2. So I mean like you might be right, Ears. Like it does hit like so this card being a 3 versus this card being a 4 is going to be how often your opponent ends up with the prototypes. How often is your opponent holding their prototypes instead of playing them on turn 5 to play on turn 9? Because if you hit a 10-10 with this card, it's great. But I don't think it's going to happen that often. I mean, I'll be playing this card. I'll be playing this card often because the ceiling is high. But I try and use the numbers to determine pick order. Like how often you pick this. And like I will sometimes take Dredging Claws over Dreams of Steel and Oil, even though the floor of Dreams is higher and the ceiling of Dreams is higher. Because Dredging Claws lets you give your Death Touchers Menace, and it makes your unearthed creatures unblockable. So when you unearth a creature with Dredging Claws, it gains haste and then attacks. And if it's got Death Touch, if it's a 4/1, then that means your opponent has to spend 2 creatures blocking. They don't get to just chump block your unearthed creature. It also essentially reads equip for 1 black. I have a whole thing about equipment that I want to talk about when we get to the artifacts, but equipment is great because of Power Stones. Generally, you should use the ceiling as a power order. All right, Emergency Well. Now, this card is great. Return target artifact creature card from graveyard to your hand and make a soldier. This is usually going to be a 2-for-1. You have to be a little careful on how many you run because you do need a target, but it's not terribly difficult to get a creature card into your graveyard. And since so many cards care about this card is incidentally good in everything. So like black white, you'll usually be able to return your creature and play it in the same turn because it's CMC 3. It lets you pick up your prototype creatures and play them for more mana in the late game. It gives you 2 cards to sacrifice to the black-red sack decks, and black-green is going to have the most options because you're milling yourself so much. It's just good. It's usually going to be a 4. Some decks want it a little more, some decks want it a little less, but every deck is going to be pretty happy to play a couple copies of it. This is a good card. All right, Gixian Infiltrator. So, this is a fantastic payoff at common for sacrifice outlets. There's 4 good sack outlets at common or uncommon across black and red. And this one is a really good one. So a 2-mana 2/1 is often relevant. There's not that much that pings. But even the threat of activation, the threat of being able to sacrifice something at instant speed makes this card solid. And if you get this down on turn 2, get a sack outlet, maybe that. So we looked at the black-red uncommon that makes a Power Stone. Right. So like this card might be standard playable. It's going to be tough. Make it work in standard, but there's a lot of ways to build your deck to make this card fantastic. So like the floor is 2 because if you have no sack outlets, it's going to be bad, but the ceiling is 5, and like this is the bread and butter card of the sack deck, and you don't even need to be black red to beat the sack deck. You can just have the black sack outlets. It's a good card. And then we have Gixian Soul Flare. Whoops, I didn't not know I could do that with the mouse wheel. All right, first of all, spectacular art. This is a very nice piece of art on a Phyrexian human assassin. This one is it's comparable to the Infiltrator, but it's a little bit harder to get running. So this is more likely to turn on in the late game, and this is one of the reasons. Actually, this is one of the reasons that these bats are good. The Carrion Locust. It's because of this is a relatively easy card to turn off, but it's also it's usually going to turn off after becoming a 3/4. So a 3-mana 3/4 is solid. Storm Dwarf? What is Storm Dwarf? I don't know that card. Like this card is not as good as the other, but it's going to be a 3/4. And if you're stalling out, or if you're the self-mill deck, so like there are 2-mana self-mill cards where if you go 2-mana self-mill, hit some creatures, Gixian Skull Flare, it's not likely to turn on, but it can. It's usually going to turn on at turns 5 or 6. So if you're the self-mill deck, I think this card is great. Or if you're just a grindier deck, this card is great. Being able to just grow past some of the prototype creatures is good game. All right, Gix's Caress. So this card is a little weird. I'm going to return to this one because it might only be a 2. It might be better. But for the same reason that Dreams of Steel and Oil is good this one is. Making them discard a card is fine, but the Power Stone is relevant. So like this is almost your opponent discards a card of your choice to draw a card. It's not quite. Hey Tweerd, how's it going? There are so many self-mill cards. There's some good ones too. It does. Every turn, Claude Dusam. Ah, I see. So this is a card I'm going to revisit. I might only be a 2 and it might be a 4, but right now I'm putting it at a 3 because you're limited on how many you want, and you do want to be able to use that Power Stone. Black is weirdly the worst at using Power Stones. You have to kind of eat them to get the full value out of Power Stones. But that's fine because Black is also the best in terms of raw card quality. It's a good card. It's pretty reasonable. And speaking of self-mill, this Gnawing Vermin is a fantastic piece of self-mill. It kills a solid 29% of creatures, and it's only 1 mana, so it's easy to pick up. But every black color combination wants to self-mill. So it ends up being relevant a lot of the time. It's just a solid 1-drop, which 1-drops are good now. Right? Yeah, because black gets a different source of power. They're the worst at using Power Stones other than eating them, which they're very good at eating Power Stones. Gnawing Vermin is solid. I gave it a floor of 2, a ceiling of 4. But in the self-mill decks, so like if you are just black, this card is good. If you are a dedicated self-mill deck, this card is great. Go for the throat. So I gave this a 5. I had to really go and count everything. This kills 68% of creatures, and problematically does not kill the biggest creatures. It kills all of the mid-game creatures. So earlier when I was talking about how everything has an early game, a mid-game, and a late game, this is the best card in the set for mid-game. Well, for commons and uncommons. There's a limited instant speed removal. There's a lot of good sorcery speed removal, but being able to kill something at instant speed for only 2 mana is a rarity in this set. So like this could have been a lot lower. There are a few decks where you won't have targets for this, but they're kind of rare because even killing like your opponent's 2-drop at instant speed will often be good enough. I mean, yeah, I'd rather have this than murder. Being only 2 mana is huge, but cards like this don't die to a go for the throat. So I think Goring Warplow is one of the better prototype cards. Definitely one of the best ones at common. Because a 2-mana 1/1 with Death Touch is good in this set. It's not always going to be good, but the option, you really want both options. So like this is a solidly black card. I don't have it with the artifacts because you don't want to cast this as only a 6-mana 5/4 with Death Touch. Go for the throat is cool. Ali, we are old. This flavor text is from Starwall. Oh. That's so sad. All right. I see. Oh, that's pretty cool. I know. They've gotten so much better. So this set, I think, proves that they have gotten better at making artifact sets because every other artifact set broke the game. But this is a good one. This is a good artifact set because artifacts can have colors now, and the revert, like, paying more mana for the artifact version of the card is awesome. It's really cool. Alright, so Goring Warplow. A 6-mana 5/4 Death Touch isn't great. A 2-mana 1/1 Death Touch isn't great, but both of them together, very relevant, very important. They work with that first strike card. There's some fight spells. Having access, like your 2-drop being able to trade up with their literal 10-drop is very good in this set. And even, so normally a 6-mana 5/4 would not need Death Touch, but that's not the case in this set. Having the Death Touch is still relevant, especially if you're like giving it Menace, if you're giving it Trample. There's lots of good ways to make it. This set didn't break the game. This is worse than Writhing Necromass. But Writhing Necromass was a phenomenal card. Like, Writhing Necromass was one of the best black cards. Also, like, the fact that this has more relevant type lines. Like, being an artifact is relevant, and the prototype is relevant. Like, you can never play a Writhing Necromass on turn 2, but you can play a Goring Warplow on turn 2. So, I also gave, incidentally, Tweerd, I also gave Writhing Necromass a 5. And I was wrong. Writhing Necromass should have been a 6. But this card is a 5 because both sides are relevant. Make sure it goes into black decks. I really like prototype. You're not dumb, Alu. All right, Gruesome Realization. This is another card I'm going to revisit, but I like this card a lot. It's the only thing that deals with all the 1/1 soldiers. Like, this is a clean answer to the 6-mana make 4 soldiers, but the problem with cards like these, like choking my asthma in the last set, is that sometimes opposing creatures just don't die to them. And in this one, does better than cycle. So if your opponent doesn't have any creatures that die to them, then you just divination. And the options on this card make it good at any stage of the game. Because sometimes you're going to need to play this on turn 3 to clear out your opponent's board, and sometimes you're just going to want to divinate. I think this card is good and it should be picked highly. All right, Gurgling Anointer. In the right deck, this card is the best black uncommon. In the wrong deck, it's just fine. If you can draw it, so if you trigger it one time, draw your second card one time, then it's a 2/4 flyer for 3, and that's great. But it also just keeps growing, and it picks up a creature later. So blue-black cares about drawing 2 cards in a turn, so it's pretty good. Black-white cares about creatures with CMC 3 or less, and this is good in both of those decks. It's pretty easy. It's even easy to get 1-drops back with it. So like this is almost always going to be a 2-for-1, but it's a 2-for-1 that threatens to close the game out on its own. It's a great card. Put some work into it. The floor of it is a 3-mana 1/3 that picks up a 1-drop, and that's solid. The height of it is a huge flyer that kills them and is hard to kill itself because it has 4 toughness after the first activation. I don't count Neon Dynasty as an artifact set just because it only had a few artifacts. Neon Dynasty was solidly an enchantment set. Also, I love Neon Dynasty. All right, Killzone Acrobat. So here is our second sack outlet for black, and this is a good sack outlet. So like a 3-mana 3/2 that occasionally has flying to close out a game is fine, but in the black-red sack deck, this card is great. It's not hard to give this flying 3 times in a game. If you need to give it flying more than that, you're probably in a bad place. And it's a good aggro card. Hey Minxies, how you doing? I am doing a breakdown of the commons and uncommons. I'll argue about Neon being an artifact set some other time. I mean, yeah, this set is the story this set is based on is a book that is from 1999 and is $90 on Amazon. Like, I read it in 1999 and was ecstatic about it. It's one of my favorite stories, but it's so hard to find now. Oh, I'm sorry, Minxies. All right, Moment of Defiance. This is a solid trick. Replacing itself is nice. Be a little careful. It's better in this set that it has, like, I would have given this a 2 in Crimson Vow, or even in Dominaria United because there's so much instant speed removal. And if your opponent kills your creature in response to the Moment of Defiance, that's a huge blowout. But if you can resolve this and draw a card, you're pretty happy. If you get to kill a creature with this and gain 4 life and draw a card, it's fantastic. It's a good card. Right? Yeah. There are noticeable changes because the whole point is that Teferi is going back in time to learn about it. That's okay. I got... Y'all are young and that's allowed. Alright. No One Left Behind. This is my favorite flavor of the set. It's also a cool card. So, if you pick up a big creature with prototype, then it's 5 mana. You're always saving mana with this card. You're not always saving mana. You're almost always saving mana with this card. So it ends up being really good. This is way better than 5 mana return a creature from your graveyard to the battlefield, because if you play it on a cheap creature, it costs 3 less. Like, unless you are targeting something that has CMC 4 or something that has CMC 2 or 1, you are saving mana on No One Left Behind. Dying for the cause is overrated. That's right. Look at that. Look at everybody fleeing Mish's stupid war machine. I think this card is great. It's going to see a lot of play. Moving on. Best Black Common. Overwhelming Remorse. If you pay 5 mana to exile a creature or a planeswalker, exile is relevant in this set. That's still good. I would pay 5 mana to exile a creature when the floor is 4. This is often going to be 1 mana exile a creature or a planeswalker. And then it's insane. This is probably the best black common, and probably this might be the white one that makes a Power Stone might be better than this. But it just answer anything is fantastic, and it's a common. So I think this is it's up there for best removal spell, and it is the best black common. It might be. I need to take another look at the rares, at the rare removal spells, but like this might be better than all the rare removal spells too. Like 1 black mana, exile a creature or planeswalker, so good. Power Stone Fracture. Here is a slightly worse, but still very good removal spell. Just cleanly sacrifice an artifact or creature, destroy a creature, technically card disadvantage, but you're going to have Power Stones floating around, and it feels wrong to not use a Power Stone for this. I mean, yeah, but it's also, I mean, exiling Urza for 1 mana is still pretty good. Yeah, so Healy's good too. I mean, and there's, I think, Frailes. All right, Ravenous Gigamole. This is probably the best black common creature. It is Gravedigger that mills you, and if your opponent has something that exile deals, we'll talk about it when we get to blue, but there's a few ways to stop this after you target, and if that's going to happen, then it's a 4 mana 3/4, which is fine. This is a payoff and an enabler for the black mill deck. I gave it a floor of 4 and a ceiling of 6. And the floor is only really if you have 0 targets, but you can play this is Gravedigger. This is a bigger Gravedigger that enables itself that just keeps going. Like, this is a lot of value for 1 card. It's a good 4-drop. All right. Thran Vigil. I gave it a floor of 2 and a ceiling of 6. This includes exiling cards from your graveyard. This includes putting cards from your graveyard on the bottom of your library. You want to be in a deck that can get 3 counters out of this, but if you can get 3 counters out of this and do it at instant speed, it's a solid card. This is a build around enchantment. You do have to be a little careful because it requires artifact or creature cards to be in your graveyard. I don't think Reverse Mishra is a planeswalker. I think Reverse Mishra is a creature. Hey Willie, nice to meet you. How you doing today? All right, so Thran Vigil, if you can get 3 counters out of this card, it's fantastic. Because you can do it at instant speed, and the threat of activation is relevant. It's really awkward because it takes up slots. So, like, if you have 3 Thran Vigil, that is 3 slots that aren't artifacts or creatures or removal spells. But it's a good build around. Like, you can pick it and build a good self-mill growth flyers deck. I think it's better in blue and black. We'll talk about it more when we get to blue. The Gigamole is so good. Who's Tyler? Damn, this was a cool card. All right. Thraxodemon. So here's another one of the sack outlets in black and red. 2 mana 2/2, solid. Being a 2 mana 2/2 is relevant. And being able to turn your Power Stones into cards is huge. I know it says 3 and tap, but that 3 mana is often going to come from Power Stones. So this is really good in the Power Stone deck, and it has something relevant to sacrifice in every color combination. So the floor is a 3, but in the right deck, it's going to be a 5. It's just going to keep your cards coming. There's a lot of good ways to generate card advantage in this set, but this is the most repeatable one. Trench Stalker. So this is a 5 mana 4/5, and it can gain Death Touch and Lifelink. If you activate this 1 time, if you get that second card draw to gain 4 life, it's really good, and it kills things bigger than it. Like, the threat of activation is important. So if you have, let's say you have 5 lands in play, you just played Trench Stalker, and you have 4 cards in hand, and they're all swamps, and your opponent is a 6/6, just attack. If you attack with your 4/5 and 5 mana up, your opponent is not going to block. It's best in blue-black, but like, you can make it work in most decks. Even just having like a Thraxodemon in play with the Trench Stalker is great. The threat of activation on this card makes it so much better. Oh, I like him. He does some good content. So all of the color combinations have a theme in theory, but it's not as consistent as it has been in other sets. So like white blue, for instance, here, I'm going to hop back over here. So the multicolored cards do the best job of pointing you down a path, but it's a lot more open than it has been in other sets. So like Yotian Tactician is white blue is soldiers, green white is artifacts coming into play, blue red is non-creature spells. Those are easy to get across multiple colors. So it's a lot more. So like the last set was very archetypical. You had to draft to an archetype and you would try and assemble what amounts to a constructed deck. This one is going to be a lot more micro synergies and getting certain card combinations to work rather than a whole deck that synergizes together. So look at your micro combos. You want 2 cards and 3 card combos, not whole synergistic decks. Like Hero of the white black one is artifacts and creatures with mana value 3 or less. Well, every single color has many creatures with mana value 3 or less, and every single color wants to use the good artifacts that have mana value 3 or less. As a result, the archetypes are less defined, and it makes for a very different play experience, but it should be a lot of fun still. All right, I will be right back just because I ran out of water, and I need water if I'm going to keep talking like this, and we are moving on to red. Red is the weakest color overall, but you can build the most synergistic deck out of red cards. So red is a weak color, but it's going to be if red is open, if everybody is saying, oh, red is weak, then start picking up the red cards. You're going to have a great deck. So red has the most disparity between the floor and the ceiling on a lot of these cards. Like Arms Race is a great example. I'll be right back. I'm going to leave this up. I will be right back. I'm just going to get some more water. So let's say 2 minutes or less to break. And here's my rating system if you want to see it. Hey Lethal, how you doing today? I did kind of miss my freebie music playlist. It's a nice playlist. I forgot the chat does not interact well with my system explanation. All right, moving on. So up next is red. Red is the dun, dun, dun. All right, so red is the weakest color overall, and part of that is because aggro does not work as well with the other color combinations as usual. But like a mono red aggro deck might end up being the best deck in this set. It's pretty just because so many of the cards that deal with mono red aggro are so weak against the other archetypes. All of that adds up to mean it's not a good idea to force red, but if red is open, pick red cards. All right, so Arms Race is a great example of this. You may put an artifact card from your hand onto the battlefield and gains haste. Yes, bad sneak attack is still good when you can pay 3 of the mana with Power Stones. So like if you have 3 Power Stones in a red, put in a 10/10, you're gonna win that game. Red is kind of like an aggro combo deck. It's pretty cool. So it is an iffy card, but you can build around this card and make it solid. So like the floor is a 2, the ceiling is a 5. It's a lot of work to get it up to a 5, but you can build it. I might not be able to duel you, Lethal, not tonight, but I promise I will. Today is a tight time frame, and I want to get this done. I still owe a story too. I'm sorry, Lethal. I gotta finish the set review first. It's a special week for me. Right. All right, Bitter Reunion. So this card is like it's funny that it's still a reunion is still a reunion. Like Cathartic Reunion is better. But this plays like Thrill of Possibility. Sorry, Lethal. It's a little the set review days are a little bit different because I got to keep the flow. Giving everything haste is marginal, but nothing cares about just instants and sorceries. Things care about permanence, and things care about non-creature spells. So this is a cool card. Giving everything haste is relevant, but also we looked at that Careful Excavation. Careful Excavation picks this up to keep drawing cards. So like this is a Thrill of Possibility that stays in play. Your opponent has to fear it, and then it creates many different engines. There's also a lot of cards that say if you sacrifice a permanent this turn, or whenever you sacrifice a permanent, it grows. This card is a lot better than is really good in those decks. So it's usually just going to be a 3, pick it like a 3, but if you already have the black card that cares about growing, yes, it is. Like the rummage is really good. Every part of this card is solid. I'm going to up it. I'm going to up it to a 4. because like it's not like I gave it a low effort, but it's not that hard to get more than one card's worth of value out of this card. But you do have to do it. You have to put in that effort. All right, Blitz Automaton, a 3-mana 3/2 with haste, or a 7-mana 6/4 with haste. Both of them are pretty relevant. You should treat it like a 5-mana 6/4 with haste because you will, on average, make 2 Power Stones, in red specifically. So a 3-mana 3/2 with haste is solid without being amazing. A 7-mana 6/4 with haste is solid without being amazing. But the fact that you can do either is very strong. I mean, even just putting it into play off the arms race is a lot of damage really fast. If your opponent has only played mountains, be careful. The red deck can put out so much damage in their combo turn. It's pretty scary. And this is a really good indicator of that. I think this card is solid. Conscripted Infantry, 2 bodies for 3 mana is nice. There's a lot of cards that care about going wide. The fact that this, it has to die. So like this is what you want to sacrifice. And this is a lot for this effect. Like it's no Doomed Dissenter, it's no Doomed Traveler. Like being 1 or 2 mana would make this card much better. I mean, obviously, but like a 1-mana 1/1 that made a colorless soldier when it died would be awesome. The fact that it makes a soldier and an artifact when it dies does make it pretty reasonable. Like trading, you're gonna trade this for their 3-drop and be left with a 1/1 often. It's a solid card. If you can use both bodies reliably, or if you're the sacrifice deck, pick it a little higher. I think this card's great. Ward pay 2 life is really good on an aggressive body. And the fact that they don't get to block with their 2 mana, there's a lot of 2-mana 2/1s and like 1/2s in this set, but like your opponent can't block with 2/2s. If you attack with a 1/3 on turn 3 with prowess, it can't be blocked. So the card's pretty good. You want it in a prowess deck more, but it's pretty cool. Like this is a good card. Not being a soldier hurts a little, but it's the threat of activation of just having any non-creature spell at instant speed makes it really good. Best red common, and it's not close, Excavation Explosion. Dealing 3 will kill... Hang on, let me look at my notes. Dealing 3 damage will kill 69%. That's a lot. So everybody's going to have prototypes, and this kills... So when I did the math, I did include each prototype creature as 2 separate creatures. So like I kind of Blitz Automaton once as a 2 toughness creature and once as a 4 toughness creature. But making a Power Stone for 3 mana is fantastic because there's a lot of good 5 mana artifacts. It's a cool card. I really like this one. This card is not slow. This card is 3 mana to deal 3 damage. Like, is it killing their 3-drop or 4-drop or 5-drop and ramping a little bit is awesome. Making a Power Stone for 3 mana at common is awesome. That Power Stone is worth a lot of cards. This is very nearly deal 3 damage, draw a card. If your deck has 6 Excavation Explosions, you'll be happy. I don't know why I put the floor at a 5. I guess the floor is a 5 because some decks just don't have targets for this, but you can still hit their face. It's a good card. This is what makes red work. And the problem with Excavation Explosion, so like, the entirety of the color red would be better if Excavation Explosion was red colorless. Because as it is right now, everybody's going to take this card and splash it. That's fair, ears. But like, it's not like you're going to have a use for that Power Stone that turn anyway. So this card were red colorless, all of red would be better. But as is, there's going to be white-blue decks that splash red for just 3 Excavation Explosions. It's good. All right, Chain Dancer. I gave it a 3 with a ceiling of 5. The floor is a 3. You want to be able to give this double strike, but you can give this double strike off the Power Stones, and the threat of activation is real. The pump spells are really good. I think it's going to be a red-green Power Stone pump deck based around the Chain Dancer, and that's why the ceiling is so high. You pick this really high because you want this to attack on turn 5 for a lot. But once you attack with this card, it's like I mean, it costs twice as much, but it's going to be like Sunbathing Root Wall out of the last set. It's just so hard to block, and in the late game, it suddenly deals a huge amount of damage. Card's better than it looks, but there's other 4-drops it competes with, so which is why the rating's so low. All right, here's a Dragon Engine. This is a card I might revisit. I'm not sure that a 1/3 flyer is good enough, but red, especially mono red, having access to flying is really important. And there's not a lot of prototypes that fly. Or that there's not a lot of artifacts that fly, but the fact that this flies and can be activated for Power Stones make it solid. It hits pretty hard. it might be worse than this. I gave it a really high rating because flying in red is awesome. All right, Giant Cindermaw. This card will, if you are the mono red deck, especially if you are pod drafting, will always hurt your opponent more. But a 3-mana 4/3 trample is good enough on its own, and not being able to... This is why red works. There's so much incidental life gain in this set. You really want to be able to turn it off. And that's huge. Turning off the life gain is pretty relevant. There's a 2-mana, deal 3 damage to a tapped creature in white, gain 2 life. Them not gaining life off of that, even killing the Cindermaw, is relevant. It's a good card. Alright, Goblin Blast Runner. So, card's not great. But earlier when I was saying like red is a combo color, being a 3/2 with Menace is pretty good. So as long as you can turn it on, it is great in Constructed Willy. Like, I think it makes red a viable standard deck. Mono red is not quite there. But Goblin Blast Runner is usually going to be bad, but you can build a combo deck, for instance, Bitter Reunion. Like, you'll have games where you put down 2 Goblin Blast Runners, sacrifice the Bitter Reunion to give them all haste, and now suddenly it's a 3/2 with Menace and haste. So there will be a mono red, just 1-drops, hyper aggressive deck that wants Goblin Blast Runner, but nobody else does. It's not even great in the black-red sack deck. Like, it's playable, but you don't want it. Horn Stoneseeker. Now, this is a great card. It also incidentally enables a Goblin Blast Runner, so if you attack your Horn Stoneseeker and they kill it, suddenly you sacrifice that Power Stone and your Goblin Blast Runner grows. But a 2-mana 2/2 with Menace, this is one of the cheapest ways to make a Power Stone. It's one of the only ways to make a Power Stone that can be easily used on turn 3. And the fact that the Power Stone dies with it is pretty reasonable. A 2-mana 2/2 with Menace that ramps is really good. This is just a good card. It's efficient. Alright, Mishra. Poor Mishra, because Urza is a busted card in this set. It is a lot. Yeah, there's a lot of value for 1 in a red. Alright, Mishra's really good. 3-mana 2/1 haste is not quite playable, but really it's a 3-mana 2/1 that lets you rummage with your turn 2 Power Stone. So like a turn 2 Horn Stoneseeker lets you play a turn 3 Mishra and rummage in the same turn. You'll have situations like red goes off. So you'll have a situation where you go turn 1 Goblin Blast Runner, turn 2 Horn Stoneseeker, turn 3 Mishra, use the Power Stone from Horn Stoneseeker to activate Mishra, discard an artifact with Unearth, use a 2-mana that Mishra makes to unearth the artifact you just discarded attack. This is way better than Goblin Picker. It's like kind of weird because it has lots of little synergies built in. I should lower the floor a little because sometimes this is going to be a bad Goblin Picker. But it's a good card. Mishra will do some work. Like, being legendary is relevant. Having a CMC of 3 is relevant. Rummaging is relevant. And that 2 red mana is relevant more often than you'd think. It's only unfortunate because the uncommon Urza is so much better than the uncommon Mishra. Poor Mishra. It's a good card. Take it high. Mishra's Domination. So I'm going to revisit this, but this feels very on plan for red. Like, giving a creature +2/+2 for 2 mana is often fine. There's a lot of ways to generate card advantage in this set, so just being down a card, like being 2 for 1 because you put an aura on a creature, is not as bad as usual. And like, if you, like, when I say there's going to be a cheap red deck, like turn 1 Goblin Blast Runner, turn 2 Mishra's Domination seems really bad, but it's gonna get you, and you're gonna feel bad when you lose to it. And then having a playset of Mishra's Domination isn't terrible, because sometimes you're just going to turn off blockers, and you're gonna be like, whatever, you can swing for 10, but you can't block my 3/2 Goblin. There's some cool Neo cards. Like, there's gonna be some good blue-red artifact decks. All right, Mishra's Onslaught. This is another card that is bad on its surface, but this deck wants to go wide, and the fact that this can either pump your team or put down 2 bodies at instant speed makes it playable. Both modes are bad, but the options make it playable. You do want it to be a go wide card, but also being a non-creature spell that is creatures is relevant, and putting 2 artifacts into play at instant speed is relevant, and putting 2 soldiers into play at instant speed is relevant, and pumping your team is relevant. Every part of this card is relevant. It's playable. It's not good. Except when it kills you. All right, Monastery Swiftspear. You know it, you love it, you've seen it before. It's a 2/3 for 1 mana. It attacks like a 2/3 for 1 mana, and it generates a huge amount of damage if you put it out in turn 1. If you are going to end up in mono red, in a mono red aggro deck, it's because you saw late Swift Spears. It's a little bit better in blue red, but there's a good mono red aggro deck using Swift Spears. I don't have too much to say about it. It grows. Being a 2/3 is huge. A 2/3 attacking for on turn 2 is huge, and even the threat of activation is huge. So if you attack with your Monocyte Swift Spear on turn 2, they can't even block it with their 2/2. If you go turn 1 Swift Spear, attack for 1, they go turn 2, play a 2/2, and then you go, okay, untap, play a land, attack for 1. They're not blocking. The threat of activation is huge there. Yeah, this is a good card all around. All right, Obliterating Bolt. 4 damage kills 83% of the creatures in this set. It doesn't kill prototypes, but that's okay. The exile is relevant. This is 2 mana, kill a creature. It's very good, and red is saved by the power of its removal spells. Unfortunately, all of the red removal spells are easily splashable, so even if you're the mono red deck, you're going to be fighting with other people for Excavation Explosions and Obliterating Bolts. Card's always good. Pendragon Strongbow. So this is a sack outlet, not for creatures, but for Power Stones. But what this does say is if you attack with this unblocked, all your Power Stones become shocks. They all deal 2 damage to the opponent. Just cashing in extra Power Stones is solid. This is a reasonable 3-drop, but if you are making a lot of Power Stones... So the reason this is only a 3, I gave it a floor of 3 and a ceiling of 5, is that you want to already have Power Stones. You want to have a lot of Power Stones for this card to be good. But if you have the Power Stones, this card's great. That's why the ceiling is a 5. All that it takes to get this card from a 3 to a 5 is a huge number of Power Stones. You want like 5 or 6 Power Stone makers in your deck. But there's lots of relevant times to sacrifice artifacts. Like even just unearthing a card and attacking makes an artifact. But this enables so many cards, I'm actually going to raise it to a 4. All right, Pyrrhic Blast. I love this card. I think that I have the biggest difference between this. This is the card I probably have the biggest difference between myself and other streamers, because this is fling draw card. Like when I say that red is a combo deck, I mean you are putting in lots of early damage. Like your goal is to put in like 9 points of early damage and then finish them off with a Pyrrhic Blast or a Pendragon Strongbow. But like you will be using your Power Stones to pump up the Strongbow and then fling it with a Pyrrhic Blast. So you're gonna have situations where your opponent only has a Strongbow in play and you're like, I can take this, and then they're gonna feed it 3 Power Stones, shoot you for 3, make it a 5 power, hit you for 5, and then use Pyrrhic Blast to hit you for another 5, and you're just going to take 13 and die. The Strong Bull is pretty good. So I like this card. Don't take too many. Like you want maybe one of these, but you're going to have lots of situations where you just play out a huge creature and Pyrrhic Blast them for the win, and drawing a card is really good. It means that with Fling, you'll have feel bad moments where you have to fling your 3/3 at their 3/3 to keep from dying, and you're just down 2 cards for their 1 card. But Pyrrhic Blast replaces itself, so that helps a lot on it. This is my favorite red card. It's not the best one, but it's pretty good. All right, Raise to the Ground. I'm going to revisit this. I'm putting in a revisit note. Basically, this card is good. A 3 if killing the Power Stones is relevant. I don't know that killing the Power Stones will be relevant, but being able to kill a Power Stone and draw a card is really good. And there's enough big artifacts that, like, 3 mana is a lot for that effect. But being able to kill your opponent's prototype creature in the late game is also very relevant. So I think this card is playable. It's not good. It's a late pick. I'm lowering it to a 2. I talked myself into a 2 for it. But you have to kill artifacts. You have to kill artifact creatures specifically. All right, Rock Hunter. You'll play it. You need 2 drops. It's got 3 power for 2 mana. No effort. There's not a lot to say about this card. The reach lets it block reasonably well. I'm going to up this to a 3. I think that this has... You will play this often because it is 3 power for 2 mana, and it's 3 power for 2 mana that blocks okay. It trades with most of the flyers. All right, Sardian Cliff Stomper. Here is the red mountains deck. You have to be mono red for this deck, for this card. Like as opposed to the other ones, this isn't a 3/4 when you have 3 mountains. This does nothing unless you have 4 mountains. But if you are mono red and you play this on turn 2, then it attacks for 4 on turn 4. And 4 toughness is a lot. It's a really good card. It's a really good card for mono red only. So if you open this card and then you get it pick 9, and you have 4 red cards and 4 white cards, take it and go mono red. It's solid. Mono red aggro is going to be pretty reasonable, but it's dependent on this kind of card. This, I said that mono red has to get in for like 8-9 points of damage early. This is how mono red does it. All right. This is the best Threaten has been. So Sibling Rivalry is Threaten, make a Power Stone. I think Involuntary Employment was better because it made it treasure, but this is the best Threaten has been because the creatures are so good. So like if you play this on turn 4, you will often be able to sacrifice a creature. Like there's even in black has ways to sacrifice creatures that don't cost any mana. There are artifacts that aren't creatures that you're going to want to take with Sibling Rivalry, and there are huge creatures. Like the reason that red is a reasonable aggro, right? So the reason that red is a reasonable aggro deck is because it has ways to close out the game late. So like it has cards, like sometimes your opponent will stabilize at like 10 life, and then they'll play out their 10 mana 10/10 with trample, and you will Sibling Rivalry it to hit them for 10. Threatens are usually better when there are better creatures to take. In this set, everybody's going to have some good creatures to take. And the fact you need both. This card is good because it has both. You can take big creatures. You can deal with big creatures. With red has a lot of trouble dealing with creatures that have more than 5 toughness, because you can take them and sacrifice them. The sack outlets are good, and the targets are good. Like that's what you need for Threaten to be good. You need good targets and good sack outlets. Fall of Krug. Card's bad. Sad and bad. It's just really awkward. The one thing it does counter is the 6 mana make 4 soldiers. So like if your opponent is making a lot of soldier tokens, it's fine. But destroying the land is less relevant than it has ever been. Sibling Rivalry is so cool. I like that card a lot. But yeah, Fall of Krug, by the time you hit 6 mana, your opponent is not going to have creatures that die to Fall of Krug. Not if they expect it. You will get people with this sometimes. Hitting someone for 3 is relevant, but red has better, bigger finishers. If it could like destroy an artifact or land, this card would be great. But the fact that it only hits lands is just not relevant often enough because your opponent will have already made Power Stones to cast their big spells. Like frequently, everything your opponent does after 5 mana will be an artifact or an activated ability, and the Fall of Krug is at its worst. Before this is all one. This card's bad. No. Like there are good rare lands ears, but most of them will have already used their activation. Like there's Blast Zone, but they can Blast Zone in response. The splashing comes from permanents, not from lands. Like there's some artifacts that filter mana, there's some creatures that filter mana, but there's not a lot of lands that are necessary. Like there are pain lands, but those are good early. All right. Scrapsmith and ETB mill 3 cards. It's just a 2-for-1. Like it's going to be a 3 mana 3/2, which sometimes you'll want, and it's going to be a 3 mana 2/1 that picks up cards, which sometimes you'll want. It's usually just going to be fine, but the body's relevant, and you need ways to recur your artifacts in red. Not a lot to say. This is one of the worst self-mill cards, and it's still fine. Unleash Shell. I forgot to add some notes, but 5. So this we see 5 mana deal 5 all the time, and it's bad. But being at instant speed is really relevant in this set. There's just not a lot that kills at instant speed. This kills. Hang on, let me look at my notes. 93%. This kills 93% of the creatures in the format and deals 2 damage to their controller. So like it's not the removal you want, but you'll play a few of them. And luckily you don't have to fight other players for this one. It's a lot harder to splash than the other red removal spells. So you'll end up with 2 to 3 red shells, unleash shells, which what a pun. You'll end up with 2 to 3 red shells in your deck often, and you'll be pretty happy about it. Whirling Strike. I gave it a 3. It's a lot of abilities for 2 mana. Mainly I gave it a 3 because trample is important in the red decks. You got to be able to punch through for those last points of damage. It's pretty cool. I like it. You will have places for it. Red green wants it the most, but really you just want it in like, hang on. With cards like the Sardian Cliff Stomper for that late game finishing touch. Like you play 1 or 2 of it to go Sardian Cliff Stomper or Penregan Strongbow to punch through for that lethal strike. It's solid. It's better than it looks. Normally this Whirling Strike is pretty bad, but there's a lot of ways to make it good. Like there's just prowess cards. It's weird. The red is weird in this set. I expect people to start. I expect people to draft it poorly for the first few weeks of the set, and then suddenly be like, red is the best deck. And suddenly you'll start see lots of streamers pick up mono red and draft mono red combo decks because there's not enough instant speed disruption. So like we saw a few instant speed removal spells, but like there's not enough instant speed disruption to disrupt this kind of big finish, which is cool. I'm pretty happy about that. All right, moving on to green. 30 seconds to just drink this water. If I don't stop and just breathe, then I'll forget that I can't talk nonstop for 3 hours. All the green cards started off looking really strong, but trust me, they peter off. So, Ally Animist, this is a good card. Like, this is a 1-mana 1/1, which is not horribly relevant and a little bit fragile. It dies to a lot of stuff. But you don't play this card on turn 1. You play this card on turn 7 when you can start turning your Power Stones into creatures. This is how you kill people with Power Stones. It's... And not just Power Stones. There's a lot of good just cards that turn into 4/4s. This is a great way to generate cards out of green. You do need things that make Power Stones. You need non-creature artifacts. Yeah, it does. I mean, Time Zones plus Daylight Savings Claw, it's a lot. All right. So this is a good card. Take it early, build around it. It's pretty good. It's worth, you'll see people splashing this in like blue-black control decks as a finisher. It's a good finisher. Argothian Opportunist. 3-mana, 3/2, make a Power Stone. Fantastic. This is one of the only ways to make a Power Stone on turn 3 that just ramps to turn 5, and is why 5-mana artifacts are good in green. This is one of the better green commons. I think is very strong. This is also a very good green common. Being a 2-mana 2/2 that can't be blocked by artifact creatures is awesome. It punches through a lot of early artifacts, and it can't be chump blocked by 1/1 soldier artifact tokens, which every color makes a few of. That 7 mana to put 2 counters on it seems like a lot until you have 4 Power Stones in play. 7 feels steep. But think of it this way: if you play a turn 3 Argothian Opportunist, and a turn 4 Argothian Opportunist, and a turn 5 3/2, that puts 4 Power Stones into play, then suddenly you're just activating this every turn. It's not steep in this set, because in this set, you're going to have Power Stones. You should treat this like 4 mana. Think of it as a 2-mana 2/2, that's 4, put 2 counters on it, because you're going to have extra Power Stones to use. Like, this is one of the better 2-drops in the whole set. It doesn't look like it. And that's why we are doing this set review, because I am trying to convince you right now that this is one of the best green 2-drops and one of the better 2-drops in the set. And that's because anything big enough to block this can't, because they're all artifacts. Everything that is big enough to block this is an artifact creature, and it can't be blocked. No, it doesn't get chumped so much because all of the chump blockers are 1/1 artifacts or cheap unearthed creatures. And all of the creatures big enough to eat this are giant artifact creatures. Like, this card would be bad in any set other than this one, but it's fantastic in this set, and it's going to take people 3 weeks to figure out that they should be first picking Argothian Sprite. That they shouldn't be first picking it, but like, pick 3. I'll pick an Argothian Sprite, pick 3. It's way better than it looks. That is the argument I am putting forth to you. Audacity, otherwise known as Bad Rancor. But a Bad Rancor is still a Rancor. In red, I showed you that 2-mana instant that gave something trample, lets you finish with a big creature. Audacity does the same thing, just as sorcery speed. You're going to have a big creature that you put Audacity on to give trample, and maybe they kill it. Just be a little careful. You don't want them to kill it in response. But once Audacity resolves, it will do its job. It's very efficient. Auras that replace themselves are great, unlike Blanchwood Armor. So Blanchwood Armor is the committed green card. There's so little ward or hexproof to make this card palatable. If you're giving +4/+4 with this card to a flyer, yeah, you can use it to close out a game. I think it's actually playable in like a blue-green deck where you're base green with a blue splash because you have these blue protection spells. If you play Blanchwood Armor, build around it. It's some work. But like there is going to be a reasonable Blanchwood armor deck. It's not as good as the others, but sometimes just a flyer with a Blanchwood armor or like a Blanchwood armor and bad Rancor Audacity will get there. If your draft is a train wreck, play Blanchwood armor, be mono green, and you'll get people with a turn 3 Blanchwood armor. But you don't want to be playing this card. Yeah, they are a cycle of cards that reward being a monocolored deck, which is only possible because there's artifacts in this set. So when I say that Wizards is getting better at making artifact sets, this is a really good example of them being better at making artifact sets. All right, Blanchwood Prowler. This is like just solid. A 2-mana 2/2 is solid. A 2-mana 2/2 that picks up a land when you need it is solid. You can play it turn 2 blind and be happy with your 2/2, or be happy picking up a land to have your land drop on turn 3 and just having a relevant body for later. It is definitely worse Rancor. This is Audacity is bad Rancor. All right. Boulder Branch Golem. So here's a solid prototype card. No part of this card is great, but it does just stop the aggro. So 4-mana 3/3 that gains 3 life, or a 7-mana 6/5 that gains 6 life. Solid. No part of it is great, but the options are nice. There are better 4-mana life gain cards, but you can cast this one off of your Power Stones pretty easily. All right, Burrowing Razor Maw. There is not a good flicker in this set. Prototype is too strong to make flickers a reasonable addition. All right, so 3-mana 4/2. When it dies, mill 4 cards. Be really careful with this card. Like, not a lot of them. All of the other ones mill when they come into play. So you have control over how much you mill. Burrowing Razor Maw is pretty bad because usually you're not going to have as much control over when you mill. Like, if it milled on the front end, when it came in, you milled 4, this card would be pretty good. But having to die to mill you 4 means you're usually going to trade with your opponent's 2-drop, which is pretty bad. That being said, the self-mill deck is good, and you need, I'd say, 5 or 6 ways to mill yourself, and this is one of them. So put in the self-mill deck, and it'll be fine. Yeah. All right. Bushwhack might even be better than a 5. Both sides are relevant. It lets you splash a color by grabbing a land, or it lets you fight when you need to fight. 1-mana fight is good enough. Prey Upon is good enough at sorcery speed. Like, being instant speed is better. Oh, Frumpy Lettuce, thanks for the follow. How you doing today? So, but grabbing a land, like, you're going to play this card in your green decks 100% of the time. I think that makes it a 6. I'm raising this card to a 6. This card is always good. Like, either you need a land or you need to kill what they're playing. Vergalis Frost, thanks for the follow. It's pretty good. Bushwhack is very strong. Moving on, Sentinel Stalwart. This is another card I'm going to revisit. But it feels like a worse Power Stone most of the time. However, it does turn your Power Stones into real mana. So if you have a lot of ways to make Power Stones and not a lot of uses for Power Stones, then Sentinel Stalwart turns your Power Stones into better ramp, because you can tap Sentinel Stalwart and a Power Stone to make real mana. So the ceiling's pretty high on it, but a 1-mana 1/1 is pretty weak, so make sure you have things that are worth ramping into. The problem is that most of the cards that you really want to ramp into in this set are artifacts, so it's just not necessary most of the time. But there's some rares that if you grab them early, then you'll want this Stalwart to get them off a turn or two sooner. It is any basic gears, that's true. Yeah, so I raised it up. I appreciate your input. Cradle Clear Cutter. This is another revisit. So this is a weird card. A 3-mana 1/3 that makes green, solid. A 6-mana 3/6 that, like, it's solid without being good. And a 6-mana 3/6 that makes green is also solid. This is weird, but there's a 10-mana 10/10. And there's a few rares that are just at that size. So if you have rare prototype creatures, this card gets a lot better, because what this card does is ramp you from 6 mana to 10 mana. And that's not usually relevant, but in this set it can be. So if you have rares that are huge artifacts, run the Clear Cutter. Generally those stats are not worth the size, but also being able to pump it in order to make more green mana is relevant. So it's some work, but if you put the work in, it's solid. This is a really weird card. Yes, this is a Paradox Engine payoff. If you can make this card work, This card is situationally very strong, but have that situation in mind when you take it. Don't just take it. All right, the Epic Confrontation. This is green's other fight spell. Pumping your creature before you fight makes the card so much stronger. This is solid removal. It's what green wants to do to kill a creature. And like, you'll have situations where you pump your Cradle Clear Cutter to give it +1/+2, and then it makes an additional mana. The size is relevant. Just be careful with it. It's better than it has been in other sets because there's less instant speed removal, but there's still instant speed removal. So try and before you play Epic Confrontation, identify what instant speed removal spells your opponent could have. Velagi Excavation. This is another revisit. If we assume that a Power Stone token is worth 75% of the card. Oh, Willie, thanks for the follow. If we assume that a Power Stone is 75% of a card, this is draw 2.5 cards, gain 3 life. So that does end up being about 3 cards for 5 mana. But if you're paying 5 mana and none of that comes from Power Stones, make sure you have something to ramp into. Like, this card is only good when it is ramping you, when you have uses for those Power Stones. But if you have uses for the Power Stones, it's solid, which is why the ceiling is a 5 and the floor is a 1. It's just really hard to make. It's not hard to make work. It's medium to make work. You have to put some effort into making it work, and then it's fine. Fog of War. Card's bad. There's a deck for this. Like, this is a sideboard card. It is a good sideboard card. Oh shit, you're right, Ears. I need 4 more followers. It's 700 followers. Yeah, so this is a good way to stay alive against the tokens deck. It's a good sideboard card. So don't bother with it in best of 1, but if it's in your sealed pool, know you have it and side it in against the tokens deck. Because if your opponent is mono red aggro and they attack you with 10 tokens and you say, okay, Fog, gain 10 life, they're just going to concede, and that's sad. But for the red decks. But it's a reasonable Fog effect. It's not strong. Just be aware of it. Gaia's Courser. Now here's a good payoff just for it being a mill deck, a self-mill deck. So you don't have to be self-mill for Gaia's Courser to draw a card on attack. Field is going to be a good one. Okay, I can't do evil laughing when I'm talking so much. All right, but this is a great card. 5 mana, 4/5 that is likely to draw you a card is relevant. So Gaia's Courser, don't look at it like it has to be a self-mill deck. Gaia's Courser is going to draw you a card unless it's actively countered, which there are ways to actively counter the Gaia's Courser. Most of them are going to be in blue, and we'll talk about them soon. But Gaia's Courser is a 5 mana, 4/5 that will usually draw you a card on its attack. If it doesn't draw you a card on the first attack, you can make it draw you a card later, and it takes a little work. But it doesn't necessarily have to be self-mill. You can just throw your creatures into their creatures, and it'll start drawing you a card. If this draws you 2 cards, you're going to win. Okay, so this card is awesome. Gaia's Gift, it gives reach, a counter, reach, trample, hexproof, and indestructible. So a trick can be offensive, it can be defensive, it can be a protection spell for like an instant speed removal, or it can be an offensive spell. So you can be offensively defensive with a card like Witch's Web, because you'll untap your creature to make a surprise blocker, or grant reach to make a surprise blocker. The fact that this card does everything is so powerful. Like, this counters their removal spell. It lets you win a combat. Even if they pump, it lets you survive a combat. It gives trample to force through a win over their small creatures. And it gives hexproof and indestructible. Like, the fact that it does everything and leaves something behind means that this card is very strong. And I'm going to up the ceiling a little bit. We're going to revisit it. We will not be revisiting this card to make this card worse. We might be revisiting this card to make it a 5, which I don't think I've ever given a combat trick a 5 before. But this is a fantastic trick. It just does everything. Green decks will always play this. It's just a matter of how many, and I think usually 2 is going to be correct just because of Giant Growth. This is the worst that Giant Growth has been. I mean, yeah, it is. If this gave lifelink, it would be a 6. But the fact that, like, it's still just a protection spell. Like, it does everything, and the modes are all good, but no mode is busted enough to make it a 5. And generally, I put a 5 as something that is strong. No, I'm gonna leave it at a 4 for now because you're limited on how many you can play, and green is limited on how often it can hold up 2 mana. But that's also why I think green blue is such a strong archetype. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about when this is a 5 as we get to blue. Like generally, if you are green X, this is going to be a 4, just because the cards that it competes with for space are different in every color. Like with black, it's going to be competing with actual creatures. With white, it's going to be competing with the go wide cards. And in blue, it's not competing with anything. Like in blue, you just want it. So in green blue, this is a 5. In mono green, in green black, in green white, this is a 4. And in green red, this is a 3 unless you build to kill with it, which there are better cards in red for that. It's a cool card though. I think it's very strong. All right, Giant Growth. So Giant Growth would normally be a 4, but in the reason that it's normally a 4 is because it lets you win target combat. Oh, thank you, Princess Crystal. Giant Growth is good because it's 1 mana, win target combat, or save target creature from removal spell. But there are fewer removal spells that Giant Growth saves you from. There's more cards like Go for the Throat, Arrest, Tap down permanently, Stun, and Giant Growth doesn't save your creatures from that. And also, creatures are big enough that Giant Growth won't necessarily make sure your creature wins a combat. It's still a good card, and you'll still usually play it, but it has more competition and does a little bit less than it has in other sets. I love that it's in this set. All right, Gnarl Root Pallbearer. Gnarl Root Pallbearer. This is a true payoff for the self-mill. If you give something +10/+10, and it already has trample, you're winning the game. And you'll play 3 to 4 copies of this in your self-mill deck. But if you're not a self-mill deck, if it's only giving +3/+3, card's average. So this is a self-mill payoff, and is a really good one. But you do need to have that self-mill. It's also play around it. You will win games from leaving a blocker back on a key turn so that your opponent can't kill you with a Gnarl Root Pallbearer. And I will, on stream, more than once, win a game by going to 1 because I correctly calculated the number of creatures that my opponent would have in a graveyard. This is really cool. I love this card. I think it's so strong. Pallbearer. All right, Haywire Might. This has so many important targets. It kills all of the non-creature removal spells. This is often going to be worth a first pick. You do have to be green for it, but like this kills aggro. Like this gains 2 life against aggro. It blocks and kills something against aggro. Has targets against everything. Even if you're killing a Power Stone, it's still relevant. The fact that it exiles is relevant. The fact that it gets picked up by all the things and return a creature with CMC 3 or less is relevant. So like green-white recursion of Haywire Mites is really good. Cards. I'm a little stunned that they made this card, but like this is a constructed playable card with plenty of targets. Very strong. Hoarding Recluse. This is cool because this is a card that looks very bad on paper, but every piece of it is relevant. Having 3 toughness is relevant. It survives this figure, right? It's so good, Ears. But Hoarding Recluse, I would give this a 2 or 3 in other sets. In this set, putting a card in a graveyard, in your own graveyard, you will often be able to draw it. Putting a card in your opponent's graveyard is something that they can't recur. Having Death Touch is really relevant because there's a lot of fight spells and there's a lot of huge creatures. Like, normally a 4-mana Death Touch creature is not going to be good. But if your opponent plays a 9-mana 9/9, then yes, it's suddenly very good. It stops unearthed creatures, and the reach is relevant because there's lots of 2/2, specifically 2/2 fires in this set. Like, Windrake is a common stat line. There's a white Windrake, a black Windrake, and a blue Windrake, and there's multiple blue Windrakes, multiple white Windrakes, only 1 black Windrake, no green Windrakes, and even a red Windrake, which is unusual. They're bigger, crunchier flies. So that's like a thing. The wildlife does start being able to process metal because they start eating Phyrexians who are partially metal. And like, the Brothers' War takes place over a long period of time. I mean, it's only like 100 years, but one of the consistent things in Magic, or in Magic the Gathering in the universe, is that magic aids evolution. So creatures evolve to handle things faster because of magic, with only 1 or 2 generations rather than dozens of generations. So yeah, they did evolve to eat Thopters. Pretty cool. Ironclaw Crusher. Here is a very good example of a prototype creature. It's a solid card, so a 4-mana 2/5 is usually going to be a 4-mana 4/5 on attack. but there's enough good pump spells. So if you Giant Growth an Iron Claw Crusher and then attack with it, then that's 6 extra power you just got out of your Iron Claw Crusher. This is just a good on either end. It's a good card. All right, Obstinate Baloth. Always going to be a 4 mana 4/4 that gains you 4 life. The rest of the attacks is only relevant and constructed. There's only one card that your opponent has that makes you discard it. And it will only ever be a target if it's the last card in your hand, and is not going to be the last card in your hand on turn 4 unless you are struggling to get that second green source. That's normally the case here, but that doesn't work when they're made of metal. So the Baloth's a cool card, but a 4 mana 4/4 that gains 4 life is what it is, which is a 5, but you will never use the discard portion of this card. Or if you did something, you're already winning that game. Most of the things that affect the hand, exile. Perimeter Patrol, it's a 3 mana 3/3. Like, the artifact coming in is relevant. It'll often attack as a 4/3, which is nice because it trades up with your opponent's 4 drops. But in general, there's going to be better 3 drops, just stuff that's more unplanned. If you are a heavy artifact deck, then this will be the 3 drop you want. But the more Perimeter Patrols you have, the fewer cards that make artifacts. And mostly you want... Like, I think that Argothian Opportunist is better than Perimeter Patrol, even though they're in the same deck. You want them both. But like, if you have a Perimeter Patrol and I have an Argothian Opportunist, then my creature kills your creature and I still have my Power Stone. So like, it's a playable card. It's just not as good as the other 3 drops. Rust Goliath. I keep saying 10 mana 10/10 with Trample. This is the 10 mana 10/10 with Trample. The 5 mana 3/5 portion of it is relevant. It's usually just going to be a 4 because it is a 3/5 with reach that in the late game closes the game. Like, if you get a 10 mana, you're going to win that game. However, if you have, for instance, a plan in your deck, a reasonable way to get to 10 mana, then this card goes up a lot. Like, then this card is so strong. Like, this is not normal. You don't normally plan to be able to cast a 10 mana 10/10. This one casts a 10. You can cast a 10 mana 10/10 and then block with reach. Incidentally, this is also the card I was talking about for Sibling Rivalry, the Threaten of the set. Sometimes your opponent will stabilize by putting out a 10 mana 10/10. It blocks your flyers, it blocks your ground creatures, and then you threaten it and attack them for 10. And then fling it. That's not going to happen very often, but it'll happen at least once. Alright, Saren Steel Seeker. So this is a payoff. There's lots of cards that like get +1/+0 until on turn, or maybe grow. But this one generates card advantage. Like, if you put out a Saren Steel Seeker on turn 2 and then start making Power Stones, you're just going to keep generating cards. Being able to mill yourself one, like being able to surveil, is also useful. Surveilling cards in your graveyard, even if they're not lands, very good. I'll take this pretty high. I think the ceiling it's still going to be a 4, but I'm going to raise the ceiling a little bit. Because in the right deck, if you ever got to play with like Quandrix Apprentice, I think that's what it was. The 2 mana 2/2, you will eventually just realize that you have more lands than you could ever use, and there's enough looting in this set to make that relevant. It's pretty cool. Shoot Down. This would be unplayable in any other set, but every single deck has targets for Shoot Down, making it a bad removal spell, but you still need removal spells. You got to hit those big creatures. You got to hit your opponent's engines. And everything, not every deck has artifacts and enchantments, but every deck has either artifacts or enchantments or flyers. This is Tinkering. I would like to revisit this card. I would like somebody to tell me that this card is broken. But currently, it lets you flash in a 2 mana 2/2 at the cost of sacrificing a Power Stone. There is an uncommon artifact that it combos with, and I will talk about that when we get there. But generally, this is just going to be a weird trick. If you could put it... Like, sometimes you're just going to put 2 counters on a creature. The options do make it a little bit more playable, but like 4 mana is a lot for a trick, even if it's putting 2 counters on something. But turning your land into a creature is relevant. Turning your artifact into a creature is relevant. And just growing your creatures is relevant. Yeah, exactly. Untapping it is... I guess it is only 3 mana if you're targeting a land. Like, you still need 4 lands in play, but you can target your land and then untap it. It's a weird card. I would like to revisit this. I would like somebody to build a deck with like 4 of them. Megrim, thanks for the subscription. I really appreciate you, buddy. Wait, you subscribed like a few days ago. I don't know why. I remember you subscribing. I don't know why it only just gave me the notification. Twitch is having some issues right now. Sure thing, Claw. All right, a 2 mana 3/1 with Ward 2, solid. It makes your tricks safer. So a lot of cards in this set are like if I giant growth and they shock it, I'll be very upset. It's weird, Megan. But yeah, if I giant growth it and it's a lot harder to kill in response. Ward 2 is a relevant ability here. Even though it still dies to the things that ping, it's still relevant. All right, Wasteful Harvest. Card's not good. So if you're just picking up a permanent with it, it's not good enough. But if you get something out of the mill, it's very good. It's only awkward because it's not itself a creature. And all of the cards that mill care about picking up creatures. This is also not a card you can play too many copies of. But like the mill deck wants one, maybe two. But because the mill deck can't play like five of them, don't worry too much about picking them up. Because even if there's another self-mill player at the table, you'll still get a copy of this. Okay, I need to get more water again? Yeah, I'll be right back. And then we will finish up with blue and artifacts. But we are down to our last two colors. Then we're done. Be right back. I don't know that card, Willie. Ooh, I'm losing my voice a little bit. But we're going to finish tonight. We're going to finish soon. All right, last bit. Air Marshal. Card's cool. 2 mana 2/1 is fine. Like, you want some 2-drops. It's good defensively. It puts some damage. And it's a fine finisher. Limit yourself on how many of these you play. But White Blue Soldiers, gaining flying is solid. This card's better if you pick up some of the rare soldiers first. So, like, this is not a premier soldier card, but you want one or two because sometimes your opponent's going to stabilize and you just got to pay 9 in to get through. 3 seems steep, but remember you have Power Stones. Curate. Curate's a weird card in the set because it does a little something for every deck, but it's usually the worst version of what that deck wants to do. So pick up Curates for your blue X decks. Like if you are trying to trigger Prowess, it's 2 mana, but it does replace itself. If you are trying to mill yourself, it's 2 mana, but it does replace itself. It's reasonable, but don't pick it too high. And it's best when you both have, because it lets you see 3 cards. It's best when you both care about playing the spell and have something strong to dig for. So if you have some bombs, then Curate gets a lot better. Defabricate. It does not draw a second card. It surveils 2 and draws. Defabricate. I think this is a good sideboard card. I haven't seen anything that is like, I have to deal with this. But if your opponent is on the Power Stone deck, like if your opponent is a dedicated, make Power Stones, play huge artifacts, Defabricate is better than the other counter spells. Yeah. Yeah, Fabricate's like $6 and should not be. Yes, that's true. Exactly. So it triggers every archetype, but you have to have, I think in order for that to be worth doing with the archetype, you also want to have cards to dig for. So like that's not necessary. Like that's why the floor is a 2 because I assume you have some number of cards to dig for, but like you want the cards to dig for first, which is why even though it triggers most stuff, I don't think it's going to go that high. Defabricate. This is a great sideboard card. It's really good against like blue green, but mostly it's going to be a little awkward. When it's good, you're gonna really want it, and we'll talk more about it in 2 cards. Depth Charge Colossus. If you can afford to play this, if you're the Power Stone deck, you can also afford to untap it and then it gains vigilance. Then it becomes a 9 mana 9/9 with vigilance, or a 6 mana 6/6 with vigilance. Neither half is great, and unlike the other prototypes, this one, you need power stones for both halves on this one. I see. All right, yeah, you need power stones for both halves on the depth charge Colossus, but it's a pretty good payoff for having a lot of power stones. Pick your power stones higher than the depth charge Colossus, and that's going to go for. That's mostly true unless you have like a rare prototype creature. You want your power stones before your prototypes. Prototypes come second. So like back to green, the 3 mana 3/2 that makes a power stone is better than the 3 mana 1/3 that makes mana in terms of pick order, even though one's an uncommon. Desynchronize. So this card would normally be a lot worse, but Scry 2 on a tuck effect is great. I love the art on this one too, but Scry 2 on a tuck effect is great, and being instant speed answer anything is important. Like it's pretty relevant. It's also just kind of like a dead zone for blue. So blue will often have 5 mana up on their turn, on your opponent's turn. And there's no, like, this is post your early threats, and blue doesn't have a lot of mid-game threats, so being able to desync your opponent's 5-drop is pretty relevant. And even just responding to a pump spell is relevant. And dealing with any permanent is also important. The Archaeologist. So I actually had this much lower. I had this at a 2 before, and then a 3, and then I'm like, okay, but what does blue want to do? Blue wants either, in any given game, like if blue wants on turn 2, a 2 mana 1/4 that mills himself. And a 2 mana 1/4 is a great blocker early, and it gets pretty bad in the late game. And in the late game, you get to pick up your removal spell, you get to pick up your bounce spell. So like the fact that this has that option of being either an 0/3 chump blocker that picks up a non-creature, non-land card, like non-creature, non-land is wide. That lets you pick up your planeswalkers, that lets you pick up your enchantments, relevant artifacts. This is one of the better self-mill cards. Blue just cares a little bit less about self-mill. But a 1/4 body is something that blue wants because blue tends to win in the late game. Okay, Flow of Knowledge. You need X to equal 5. If you play this card for X equals 7, you're winning the game. Blue's just weird because the looting in blue is awkward. So there's a lot of looting in blue, and what that means is, like, if you ever watch me draft Crimson Vow, you might notice that I always say in Crimson Vow, know when to stop playing your lands. Because in Crimson Vow, you should be like, okay, the most I would need to do is play a 5-drop and hold up an Undying Evil, or play a Grizzly Salvage. Not Grizzly Salvage, Grizzly Ritual. And blue kind of acts like that in this. At a certain point, blue will stop playing his lands because, well, should I skip ahead? I'm not going to skip ahead. In a few cards, we'll get to the reason why blue stops playing his lands, but there's lots of looting. Sure thing, ears. Have fun. Thanks for being here. So with Flow of Knowledge, you'll stop at 5, but at 3 mana, draw 5 cards, discard 2 cards. That's spectacular. It's only awkward because there's so many looting like Urza and Takesha's Lessons that you're going to be discarding your extra lands to, because at a certain point you don't need more lands, you need power stones. It's just weird in that respect, but if you are a mono blue deck, this card is spectacular and you're winning the game when you play it. Forging the Anchor. Card's bad. There's just better things to do. There's better versions of divination in this set, and you can whiff with this divination. If you think that you have enough artifacts to hit 3, 4, or 5 artifacts some amount of the time with Forging the Acre, go ahead. But it's going to be a lot of work, and you're not going to be happy playing it. Hulking Metamorph, a 4-mana 3/3 version of whatever the best card is. Whatever your best card is awesome. And like, you can get weird things. There's this is something that will become more apparent as we get to the other artifacts, but it's really good. This is one of the better prototypes. Being a 7/7 version of some of, like, you can copy an artifact and be a creature, and that's relevant in a lot of ways. But this is good at 4 and it's good at 9, and it's not, blue does not have a lot of trouble hitting 9. Blue is probably the best at casting its huge prototypes. Blue's very good in this format. Involuntary Cooldown. This disables 2 creatures for 3 turns. It's a tempo oriented card, so you want to be more aggressive. Like, there's two situations where you want involuntary cooldown. You don't want to just jam it into your control deck, but if you are, it is Willy. But if you are a tempo-oriented deck that put down a bunch of creatures and then they're attacking with 2/3/3s, then you get to tap down 2 creatures and just keep punching through. They'll be dead before their creatures untap. If you are a late game deck with lots of cards like Hulking Metamorph, then buying yourself 3 turns for 4 mana, because this does, if you tap down 2 creatures for 3 turns, and that's not enough to keep you alive for 3 turns, then you're losing that game anyway. Doesn't matter how good this removal spell is. So the floor of this is a 3 because you don't want it in a strict mid-range deck. You want it either in a control deck that can replace the card draw, like something like Flow of Knowledge, where you replace all the cards you just spent being on a negative card with involuntary cooldown. Or if you're an aggressive tempo deck, you'll kill them before they untap. But generally, this card is going to play at its ceiling. It's very cool. Keeper of the Cadence. I had this at unplayable, and then I pumped it up to a 2, and then I bumped it up to a 3 once I finished looking through all the spoilers, because a lot of cards care about artifacts. So you can play this with your own cards if you're a heavy enough control deck. If you're self-milling, you're going to, like blue-green self-mill will run out of cards and then just put its best cards on the bottom for the rest of the game. Because there is enough removal in blue and green to do a strict blue-green control deck that just resets its own good cards. Ooh, I was brought some tea by a wonderful person, and now I can drink the tea, but it's hot. Ooh. Or if you're like blue-black and you are, oh my god, that helps so much. If you have like the Thran Guardian, that's a good way to trigger the cards, to trigger the counters and grow. So like this is a synergy card, but you can buy Weird Time with it and it blocks well. It does its job. All right, Coilless Rock. This might be the best blue common. It's definitely up there. Like, making the tap Power Stone is not so relevant on their end step. And like I said, you will frequently be holding up 5 mana on their end step because of the Coilless Rock. Representing Coilless Rock, so if your opponent has 4 blue untapped, this is a common. You can't attack with 2/2s. Like, your 2/2s can't attack into 5 untapped mana from blue. And it leaves a Power Stone behind, which not every color, it's not relevant to every color, but blue still wants the Power Stone of 5 mana. This card is deceptively strong. It's also beautiful. Look how big it is. It's grabbing a boat out of the air, a Thopter out of the air, not a person. This card's so cool. Right? Well, so like, it's weird. Keeper of the Cadence is so weird. It's a weird card because like, it is, I ran it through every deck and every archetype, and it does something relevant in every archetype. It's so weird. But like, even just countering your opponent, like, it counters all recursion. Like, hang on. So if your opponent plays a Philology Archaeologist, that targets. Oh no, it doesn't. It doesn't target. So maybe that is a little weird. But like, having something that like recommission, just pick up a artifact or creature, being able to put it on the bottom in response is huge. Graveyard interaction is good in this set. All right, Coilless Rock is great, one of the better blue commons. Latinum Adept, this is the payoff for drawing a second card each turn. Like, if you have 3 Latinum Adepts and 3 Curates, your deck is great. If this is a 4-mana 4/4, it's great. If your opponent has, so if your opponent has 5 mana up, and for the Coilless Rock, you attack with your Latinum Adept, you can do that safely because they can't play it and then block. The risk of you just drawing a second card is too high. This is a good payoff. Chamomile with a bit of honey. Rejuvenating. All right. Machine over Matter. So I talked about this card on Twitter. I love this card. The story of it is cool because in the story, Urza, so the king says, move this jade statue and you can marry my daughter. And he builds a goal. He says, what if I move it with my mind? And then he builds a machine. And you may remember an old card from Exodus called Mind Over Matter, which also represented this in a more abstract form. But Machine Over Matter, it's hard not to have an artifact. Like on turn 2, you won't have an artifact. Oh, it's only artifact creature. So you're not always going to have an artifact creature, but Disperse is good enough in this set. Like if you're paying 1 mana, it's great. But 2 mana to bounce a creature at instant speed is so good because it can't be countered by a lot of the pump spells. It bounces a lot of relevant creatures, and even just returning your own Because you can return your own permanents too. Like returning your own Hulking Metamorph in the late game to recast it is awesome. You'll have situations where you dodge a removal spell by bouncing your own Hulking Metamorph and then just recast it as a 7/7 instead. Very good. This is like, yeah, 2 mana to bounce anything is very good in this set specifically. Mightstone's Animation. This is another card I came back to. It basically turns a Power Stone into a 4/4 and draws a card. Turning a Power Stone into a creature is awesome, and blue wants to do it often. It takes some work, but you will usually have the ability to do this. I think this card is very good. You can even animate your opponent's non-creature artifact if you need to kill it. I'm going to come down a little bit on this because it's just a lot. Like, it's a 5 mana 4/4 because of the Power Stone that you have to sacrifice. Retrieval Agent, it's a good blocker. 4 mana is a lot. You'll use Power Stones to activate it. But it does finish the game and is hard to kill. Scatter Ray. Okay, this is weird. Countering an artifact unless they pay for is great early. Learn to play around it. Put some effort in. You'll side it out for Defabricate often because people can pay this mana with Power Stones. So it's hard to Scatter Ray something relevant. That being said, countering like counting their 9-drop with a Scatter Ray is totally doable. This is a pretty strong blue card. A lot of people are calling it the best blue common. I don't think that's true because it doesn't. If it counted anything, it would be. But like, people will learn to play around this card pretty effectively. It's a cool card though. All right, splitting the Power Stone. That it turns 1 Power Stone into 2 Power Stones. If you have like unearth cards or cards of sacrifice, it's a little bit better. If you can turn an irrelevant artifact or something that draws a card when it dies into 2 Power Stones, that's great. There's some legendary cards, like if you split the Power Stone, that's some value. You can get a lot of value out of this card, but it's some work. So don't play it generically. You have to have a use for the Power Stones. You have to have good things to sacrifice, but you'll find those. Yes, but you have to sacrifice a Power Stone to do it, which is tough. Spotterthopter, a 4 mana 2/3 that scries 2 is great. It's not great, it's playable. It blocks well. And an 8 mana 4/5 flying is also pretty solid. This is a good finisher. It's a good card in general in blue. You won't have too much trouble playing it off Power Stones. Like, this is something that like a turn blue 3 Power Stones is solid because you can leave mana up on your opponent's turn. You will often be able to play this and leave mana up, which makes it pretty good. It's a low effort card. Stern Lesson. This might be the best blue common. It's one of the only ways, it's one of the only ways to make Power Stones at instant speed, and it replaces itself. Like, this is better than draw a card, make a Power Stone, because the looting is relevant. Having cards in your graveyard is relevant. This is often just 3 mana 3/1. I'm gonna be first picking this a lot. I think it's the best blue common. Yeah, that's it. I'm gonna up the ceiling a little bit because in order to get max value out of this card, you need to have a use for the Power Stone, a use for the card you discard, whether it's recursion, a way to power up the creatures, and a deck that likes to keep 3 mana up on your opponent's turn. But there's a lot of good blue likes to keep 3 mana up on your opponent's turn. Mono blue is gonna be very strong. Take Flight. You don't have to connect for Take Flight to draw your card. It's on attack, which means at the very least this card is going to replace itself. +1/+0 and flying is relevant, and there's enough counter spells in this set that some decks will just put Take Flight on a creature and generate a card every turn and use that to just take the game over. So like, this card is very strong. I'm going to bump the ceiling up to a 6, but it does average to be a 4. Just be a little careful. I'm going to raise the floor a little bit. Be careful. Learn to play around. Like, don't let your opponent kill your creature in response. You really want to get that first hit in. If you don't get that first hit in, this card is suddenly very bad. And be a little careful to make sure you have enough creatures for this card to be good. But like, the moment when they first got their Thopter off the ground was so cool in the book. It is 1 to 10, with 10 being the best. And you're not going to see 10 is obscenely rare. There's probably like 5 or 6 10s in the history of all of Magic. Like, I wouldn't even put Black Lotus at a 10. Time Walk is a 10. Like, a 10 has to be something you pick 100% of the time and effectively wins the game when you play it. 9 is, you should expect 1 9%. Oko was a 9. Umezawa's Jite was a 9. And then, but 8 is a very good card. I don't think any of the commons or uncommons are higher than a 7. A 6 is very good. So one thing that can be a little deceptive is a 3 is not an unplayable card. You don't want to play 2s or 1s ever. 3 is replaceable. 3 is something that you want to try and get something better. But you will, if your deck has no 3s in it, you'll be very happy. Like if every card in your deck is a 4 or higher. 4 is above average. Hang on. Here's my grading scale. All right. 1, never play me. 2, try not to play me. 3 is filler. 4 is above average. 5 is strong. 6, if you are in this color, play me. 7 is a card that pulls you into the color. So like, if you open it and you take a 7, you want to be that color. 8 is always like, do your best to play me. Like, don't necessarily, something like Archangel of Wrath. What were the 8s in the last set? Archangel of Wrath was an 8. Oh, there is 110 in this set. It is Wormcoil Engine. And it is not something you will see very often. It's like one of the special old border cards, but Wormcoil Engine is a 10. You always play Wormcoil Engine in 100% of games. And it wins you the game when you play it. All right, moving on. Third Path Savant. I came back to this card. This card is spectacular. It's a 3-mana 2/3. Like, you want to be the Power Stone deck, but like, this is how you generate card advantage in blue. This is the best way to do it. The existence of this card makes cards like, where'd it go? Not involuntary cooldown. It makes cards like Full of Knowledge a little worse. Because if you have a big pile of Power Stones and you're just drawing 2 extra cards each turn, what's your opponent going to do? And it also blocks 2/2s really well. Like, it's a good blocker early. It attacks okay. Really, you just want that 7 mana, draw 2 cards. But it's a good card. That's why, so like, it's usually going to be a 3 or a 4. But if you are the dedicated Power Stone deck, this will draw you 6 cards over the course of the game and be a relevant body. Adopter Mechanic. This is another payoff for drawing your 2nd card each turn. This draws you 2 cards on your opponent's turn also. But Adopter Mechanic, the worst case scenario for this card is a 2-mana 2/1 that dies into a flying artifact, but they have to kill it. It's just going to keep growing. It plays like Fairy Vandal. It's arguable whether or not it's better than Fairy Vandal, because Fairy Vandal was a finisher. You got it up to 5 power and just attacked for 5 4 times. But Adopter Mechanic attacks well on the ground and dies into a Thopter. It's very good. Urza is also very good. Blue is really good in this set. So a Vigilance Looter, like, if they don't have a blocker, you get to attack and still loot. But this is one of the only repeatable ways to make a Power Stone, and I think it's the only repeatable way to make a Power Stone to add uncommon. If you first pick Urza, you'll be happy. And he just takes over the game. Like, if you turn 3 Urza, turn 4 make a Power Stone, turn 5 make 2 Power Stones, turn 6 make a Power Stone, turn 7 make 2 Power Stones, turn 8 play a 10/10. Urza lets you play off-color prototypes. Urza lets you play that green prototype that is a 10/10 because you don't have to worry. Like, if you have 3 Urzas, you don't have to worry about having the green because you'll always be able to play it as a prototype. There's a dedicated Power Stone deck in blue that lets you play all of the prototypes as artifacts. You don't have to worry about playing them as the correct color. It's very good. We'll talk a lot more about Urza when we do the rares on Thursday. Urza's rebuff. Turns out cancel is bad, and for 3-mana tap 2 creatures is bad, but putting them both on the same card is excellent, especially in a set with so many 3-mana things to do at instant speed. Sometimes you'll need to tap down 2 creatures to save yourself, and sometimes you'll need to counter a spell, but this card is always going to be something that you want in blue. You'll be a little limited on how many you can play, but like, this is a good version of cancel. This card's very strong. All right, blue has real actual removal. This is essentially the blue kicker spell from Zendikar, from Battle for Zendikar. So if your opponent is very aggressive and they attack you with their 2-drop, you just play it for 1 mana and you'll be fine. But you can play it for 4 mana to take a creature out of the game, and you can pay that mana with Power Stones. So you can pay the mana for Weak Stone Subjugation with Power Stones, and it will take a creature out of the game. It is a good removal spell, and blue wants many of them. It's pretty much always going to be a good removal spell. Like, you're limited on how many you can play because there are ways to untap your creatures, and there are ways to kill enchantments, like Disenchant existing. This card would be a 5 if Disenchant weren't in this set. Or every color has a way to deal with this, but it's still always going to be a good removal spell. There are some things with active abilities that it doesn't deal with, but it's worth having. Wing Commando. Wing Drake. This is Wind Drake plus. It is Windrake with prowess and a soldier. Blue wants this badly. What blue wants to do often is just play this card on turn 3 and then hold up counterspells the rest of the game. It's very good. Gathrring. And this card is even better. So it's a 2-1 with flash and flying. That would be good enough by itself. A 2-mana with flash creature is like you'll kill a 2-mana attacking creature. A 2-mana flyer is good enough. Like just putting a 2-mana flyer down on turn 2 is solid. You can get so much value out of this card. Oh, this is a medium effort card. And it's only medium effort to get it from a 4 to a 5 because at its base it is a 4. It's the same cost as Scatter Ray, which means that like you can hold up a counter spell, and then your opponent might do something like fight. They'll fight your creature, thinking you have the counter spell, and you get to respawn by just picking up that creature. It doesn't have to be a soldier for this to rescue a good creature. Card's fantastic. I'm raising it to a 5. Yeah, I like that. This card's very good. Pick it high. All right, I need 30 seconds to sip my tea, and then we'll move on to the artifacts. You don't have to, Duo. It's a May. The goal was 3 hours, so I'm kind of surprised we're still on time. So much better. Tea saved me. Okay, this is peppermint tea. I thought it was chamomile. This is really nice. Okay, Aeronaut's Wings. I want to talk about equipment. This Power Stone. So when you play equipment cards, right, Duo? All right. When you play equipment can be awkward. So like I've been doing some Crimson Vow drafting lately, and there's a card. It's a chainsaw. 3 mana to play, 3 mana to equip. Creature gets +3/+3. Suddenly that creature is huge. It's so hard to deal with. The problem with that is like if I kill it, if I bounce it, that's a 6 mana investment to make that creature bigger. And then you'll get to these situations in the late game. Exactly. When you get to the late game and you have like 10 mana, you'll equip your creature, give it flying, attack, equip it to another creature so that it can block. Moving your equipment around is what makes it good. Equipment is good in this set because of Power Stones. Power Stones make it so much easier to throw your equipment around, to move it on command, which is why this card is a 3. In any other set, this card would be a 1 or a 2. But this is a fine finisher. It lets you block well, and you can throw it around to always get an attacker through, because that equip cost is effectively 0 in a lot of decks. Even in your more aggressive soldier decks, this card's good. This is also why the 2-mana 2-1 that gives other soldiers flying isn't higher. Most decks that win with creatures will want 1 or 2 copies of this card. You do want a few Power Stones, but like a lot of the cards that want Power Stones want a ton of Power Stones. This only wants 2 Power Stones, and you'll be pretty happy with it. Giving an Avenger. This card is sweet. Like a 6-mana 5/5 that you can play with Power Stones. So in general, a lot of the artifact cards in other sets would be pretty low because they're just overcosted by 1 because you don't have that color restriction. And in this set, Power Stones mean that you can ignore that overcost by 1. You should assume that all the artifacts that cost more than 4 mana cost 1 less. Because even in decks that don't have dedicated Power Stones, you will have 1 or 2 to reduce the cost of your artifacts. And this is like it has to shrink, but being able you'll have situations where it's like I just want to attack you for 4 with haste, or I want to have vigilance and flying this turn, so I'll be a 3/3 attacker. This is a Swiss Army knife of a creature. It's going to be good in any deck that has enough Power Stones and pretty reasonable in most other decks. Astronaut's Harvester. So this card does unearth for black mana, but the reason I have it in with the artifacts is because you'll still play it if you're not a black deck. We talked earlier about how a 2-mana 3/1 is almost playable, and exiling cards from graveyards is very good. Astronaut's Harvester is both of these. And the reason I have it in with the artifacts is you'll play this card a lot with like a swamp or some random fixing, which we'll talk about in a moment, and just unearth it way later for 3 extra damage. Is a pretty good card. Coastal Bulwark. Oops, the floor of this is a 2. That's just a mistype. It's not great. It's a 2-mana 1/3. Blue will off it. So like in blue, control decks and in the self-mill decks, the Surveil is relevant. You can make this card playable, but you'll never make this card great. If this is a 2-mana 3/3 blocker that surveils because you left out a cantrip, that's solid, but that's only good after you already have the late game finishers that this gets you to. And you won't always need... Like, this isn't always going to do something against a lot of finishers. It's fine. Combat Courier. So I have this in with the artifacts because you're not always going to... Like, a 1-mana 1/1 that you can sacrifice to draw a card for Power Stones, so good. You put it down as a 1/1, you block, you use 2 Power Stones, replaces itself. And the ceiling is a 5 because if you can pay a blue to unearth it, get an extra card out of it, it's going to be good. There's a lot of different cards that work with this card to make a sort of engine. It's a cool card without being amazing. Ooh, I think this is the best artifact at common or uncommon in the set. It replaces itself, and it says your Power Stones make real mana. You can use your Power Stones to cast real spells. It also enables fixing. You're going to first pick this card a lot. Like, any pack where there's not a clearly powerful card, you'll first pick an Energy Refractor, because every deck wants 1 or 2 of them. It lets you do something like play this Ashnod's Harvester for the Unearth, even though you just used it for an artifact before. Or play this Combat Courier's Unearth. The filtering is very strong, and it enables a lot of late game splashes. Like, this isn't a deck where you want to just splash your off-color removal spell. I mean, you do, but it's not a free off-color splash. But these are free off-color splashes because they function like kicker. Unearth will function like kicker for you. You don't need that kicker for this card to be good, but Energy Refractor enables that late game unearth cost. Pick it high, try and get 1 or 2. Everybody's going to be wanting 1 or 2, and a lot of newer players are going to be very upset when their Refractor doesn't table or when they don't open a late game one. But the fact that it draws a card and fixes, like, it replaces itself. It's very good. It also enables everything. Like, it enables all of the draw 2 card synergies. It enables all of the artifact comes into play synergies. And it's the only cantrip artifact permanent. Very good. Goblin Firebomb. This one I had to reevaluate a few times, and I'm making a note to revisit. But, like, it's a 1-mana artifact with flash in a set where cards care about having artifacts come into play. So there's lots of green-white cards that are like +1/+0 whenever an artifact comes into play. So you attack your 2/2 into their 3/3, flash in a Firebomb, and it does its job. Firebomb sits there until you have enough Power Stones to kill a permanent. It lets any color kill permanents, and it'll see play in most decks. The ceiling of this may be higher than a 4, but it really depends on how prevalent the rares that care about artifacts coming into play are. So I'm going to revisit this after I did a cursory glance at the rares, but I haven't looked deep into them. So I'm going to do my deep dive in the rares on Thursday, and then I'll revisit Goblin Firebomb. Heavyweight Demolisher. If you can cast this card, you can keep it untapped. It's not an aggressive card. It is a fine finisher. Like, so many cards will be like a 10/10 without trample, and a 10/10 right. It is a universal solvent with flash, though. Flash is huge. Like, flash is huge. All right, so Heavyweight Demolisher hits hard, and at a certain point, I call large creatures abyss creatures because they just become your opponent's sacrificing creature every turn until they die. So you get some card advantage. This is an abyss creature with menace, so it's a solid finisher, but it is expensive. And a lot of these unearthed cards, like double red, is tough. And red doesn't really want to unearth this card. Like, red might make enough Power Stones to cast this card, but it is going to be tough to unearth. So it's just a 3. It has a place. You will have situations where you need this as a finisher, but those will be in any deck, not just in red decks. Okay, this card is sweet. It is a flyer that just grows. If you stick this on turn 2, it's going to act like Shrine of Burning Rage. Need to make a note. Because I'm working on a Peasant Cube. And this is, I was looking for a replacement for Shrine of Burning Rage. But this acts like a Shrine of Burning Rage. So much of the removal in this set is sorcery speed, and it dodges most of the sorcery speed removal. Like, you can't burn this if you don't want it to, but it becomes a 1/1 flyer, and it just grows over time. I think this card is usually pretty good. You need to have a certain number of non-creature spells, but in the non-creature spell deck, this is a creature that is a non-creature spell. It's very good. Mask of the Jadecrafter. This is going to be a revisit. I think that, like, if you are making a lot of Power Stones, this card is fine. What it actually says is X make an XX, and then 3x, make an XX. But you still want this, and they make an XX card. If you have enough Power Stones, you want this regardless of your colors. So like the blue Power Stone deck runs this and a Refractor, and just plays the Mask of the Jade Crafter anyway. Because if you can get us up to like a 5/5 or 6/6, you're pretty happy. And in the very late game, it'll be like a 14/14 for good with Flashback. Mine Worker. Don't count on having the Power Plant Worker or the Tower Worker. So we're going to be evaluating these as if you don't. Because even if you have 3 copies of each of them in your deck, like if you've ever played Tron against Field of Ruin, then you know that your opponent only has to kill 1/3 of your lands, and they have to guess right. But in this case, gaining 3 life is not that big a deal. However, this is still a playable card. It's a 2-mana 2/1 that gains life every turn in some control decks. You're going to end up siding it in. So if you are a control deck or a mid-range deck at your pre-release and your opponent is super aggro, bring in your Mind Workers. Because this is a 2-mana 2/1 where if they have a 2-drop, you'll trade with them. And if they don't have a 2-drop, you'll gain 6 life over the course of the game off of it. It has a place. Don't dismiss it outright. Mishra's Juggernaut. The cards that want this want it badly. It hits, like if you can get this down on turn 4 off a Power Stone, a 5/3 trample is fine. They're going to have to trade their 3/1s with it. So there's a lot of 2-mana 3/1s in this set. Mishra's Juggernaut will trade with them. It also hits your opponent for 4 and then unearth for another 5. So you will hit for 9 damage with this creature. So in order for this card to be good, you need a deck that has Power Stones and wants to hit your opponent for 9 damage for being down a whole card in 2 turns. Which, there's a lot of red decks that want to do that. There are a lot of green decks that want to do that. But you got to build to it. So this card is not good on its own. But there are decks where it will have a home. Mishra's Research Desk. This card is sweet. It usually is going to replace itself. This is a cantrip. This is a cantrip that is a non-creature spell. And late game, you can unearth it. But, like, it's a low risk cantrip. So you can't, it's not like Curate. You can't just play it on turn 2, but you have to sort of build your deck around it. It's going to be like Reckless Impulse out of Crimson Vow. If you have until the end of your next turn. So if you use it on your opponent's turn, you have 1 turn to do it. And if you use it on your turn, you have 2 turns to do it. But you can use the Power Stones. So 2 Power Stones lets you play and sack this, and then you can spend the rest of your mana to play whatever else you've got. And then you can unearth it in the late game. So like you can play this with a Mountain or a Refractor. You don't have to put it into a red deck for it to be a 2-for-1. And it's got lots of interactions with cards that care about artifacts coming into play or non-creature spells being cast. Power Plant Worker. This one's a little better than the other just because you can play it on turn 4 with a Power Stone, and it grows with Power Stones. And if you happen to have everything, this is nice because if you have everything, you can put the counters on it, and then they'll kill the cards that matter. But this card is playable on its own, especially if you get other cards that care about Assembly Workers, which there are some rares that do. Reconstructed Thopter. It is a Windrake with Unearth. It's good. It's better if you care about artifacts coming into play or need the flyer, but it's a good card. Cohort. This card's just good. A 4-mana 3/1 that makes 2 bodies, both of which are soldiers and both of which are artifacts, is solid. You don't have to unearth this card for it to be good. You have to care about both bodies for it to be good. So like you're going to play this card in your black-red sack decks. You're going to play this card in your white-blue soldier decks. It's one of the better versions of this card, and then you'll just use the Refractor to unearth it later. You can also loot it away and unearth it to get a body back. There's a lot of value to be extracted from the Scrapwork Cohort, which is a hard name for me to say. Scrapwork Mutt. Rummage Dog. The unearth is relevant. The being a 2/1 for 2 is relevant. Is something you can play off Power Stones. It's playable. It's not going to be amazing unless you care about the sacrifice. If you care about every aspect of this card, if you care about sacrificing it and rummaging and drawing the additional card, then it's good. But like you'll play this card, I'm gonna raise the ceiling because if you care about every aspect, you can get it up to a 5. But if you like, it draws. There's a lot of ETBs in this set. It's a really ETB heavy set. But yeah, this triggers your draw a second card this turn, and it's good in your mill decks. I'm gonna raise this to a 4 because like you do need to synergize with it, but it synergizes with every deck, so it's more likely to be a little higher. Yeah, I raised it. Oops. See, floor is a 3. It's going to average to be a 4. Because it takes some work. You can't just jam it in, but it'll go in most decks. Rager. So the reason that's why I wanted to move it up, because these serve similar rules. Except Scrapwork Rager actually generates card advantage. It's just Phyrexian Rager, but you can put it into any deck, and you can sacrifice it, you can mill it, and you can it triggers all of your draw a second card, which you care less about the loss of life because so many of the draw a second card effects are so many of the draw a second card effects gain you life. Flagstone Refinery. This is a Power Stone machine. If you are a Power Stone deck, it's very good. Otherwise, it's just going to be a 2. If this is only making you 2 Power Stones, you're not too happy. But if it's making you 4, 5, 6 Power Stones and you can use those Power Stones, it's spectacular. But that's a high effort deck. So you can pick it first and build around it. You can pick it late if you are in that deck. Just be careful, because a 4-mana artifact that makes a Power Stone when it comes in, that's not good enough. If you draw it off the top of your deck in the late game, it's bad. It's pretty weird. This is a weird card. It does have to die. That's even worse. I'm lowering the floor. Like, you can have a Power Stone engine deck that revolves around your artifact being sacrificed, and then it's solid. Right. So, like, this is good in, like, a black-red artifact sacrifice deck, because, like, let's say I attack with that big guy, the 2/3 that sacrifices an artifact, then sacrifice all my artifacts, and if I have 2 Flagstone Refineries, I can get lethal that way. But, like, this is a combo card. It's not good. But if you build the combo, it can be. So, Spectrum Sentinel, I'm going to revisit as a sideboard card, after I look at the rares, but there do not seem to be enough multicolored cards for this to be good, and there definitely aren't enough non-basic lands. But this is a great constructed card. This is just not something you're going to pick up very often in Limited. It is a 1-mana soldier, so it has a place in some of the soldier decks, and has a place in as a sideboard card to counter specific threats from your opponent. In general, you don't want this. Steel Exemplar. This card is awesome. So, like, we talked about the monocolored decks. This goes into all of those monocolored decks, and it goes into the heavy Power Stone deck. As just, you don't want this to be a 5-mana 4/4 with trample, but if this is a 5-mana 6/6 with trample, it's very strong. Be a little careful, because this is in the range of a disenchant, but like a 5-mana 6/6 is pretty good. All right, Stone Retrieval Unit. This is the most expensive version of this card. Sometimes you'll have a deck, maybe you have a Steel Exemplar. Like, sometimes you will want Power Stones badly enough to play this card, and I'm going to raise the ceiling up to a 4, because if you have the 2-mana Power Stone makers, then you can play this on turn 3, and then you can keep playing them. You can get a whole bunch of this card, make a relevant Power Stone deck, but you want this to be played, like, this is a make more Power Stones deck. You don't want this to be your first Power Stone maker. Su-Chi Cave Guard. It's an 8-mana 8/8 with Vigilance and Ward 4. I would love to see somebody use that bottom ability. Like, if you can use that 8 colorless, that's awesome. The original Su-Chi was a 4-mana 4/4 that made 4, so this is pretty cool. But it's not going to be relevant that often. In the decks that want an 8-mana 8/8, those Power Stone decks, you usually want prototypes first. But this is a good backup. Having the Ward 4 is relevant. Ward is not as good in this set as others because you can pay Ward with Power Stones. But in general, the decks that want this know they want it. I'm lowering the floor to a 3. So I did artifacts first. I did the rating, and I'm lowering the Su-Chi Cave Guard because I saw all the other prototype creatures, and you do want Su-Chi Cave Guard in the heavy Power Stone deck, but you want the cards with prototype more because they get to be both. So, like, if you have 5 prototypes, then you don't need the Su-Chi Cave Guard, and you want the prototypes first. Supply Drop. This card's sweet. It's a lot of work to get the full value out of it, but, like, this is, if you have 3 Power Stones untapped, then this is a trick that you get to be like, oh, I have no tricks. What trick am I going to play with Supply Drop? But, like, we talked about earlier about how having flash on an artifact is relevant, because flashing an artifact in to get a surprise trigger on an artifact coming into play is relevant. And then this, you can draw a card off of. Altogether, you need I'm lowering it to a 2 to start, but altogether, if you can get enough value out of this card to make it a good trick. So this is, again, you need power stones, and it's just awkward. Like, the flying and the haste is relevant, being a 2/4 is relevant, but you need to already be making a lot of power stones for this card to be any good. And if you're making that many power stones, you have other cards you want more, but sometimes you're going to still have to play this, and it'll be just a 3. If you manage, be prepared to bring it in against people who have graveyard shenanigans. Being able to deal with the graveyard shenanigans is nice. And if you are self-milling yourself a lot, then this card plus the 5-mana 2/5 that puts a card on the bottom can help keep you from decking. This is a card I'd love to see pop off. It's a build around. You want to have the draw 2 cards, and you need to put... The only reason this is awkward is none of the cards that care about drawing a second card in the turn have symmetrical power and toughness. All the best cards that trigger for having drawn a second card do not themselves trigger Symmetry Matrix. I would be higher if they did. Grand Power Suit. It's still it's solid for the reason that we said earlier. I'm lowering the floor because I've seen all the Power Stone makers now. It's still a 3 playable. It's so awkward. Like, it does draw a lot of cards, but you can't just jam it into any deck. So that's why I have the floor at a 2 and a ceiling at a 5. Because I went through and counted up all the creatures that care about drawing 2 cards in a turn, and they're all either... They are a 4/5, a 2/1, a 1/3, and a... there is 1/3/3. The 3/3 for 4. So you can play this turn 4, and if you get enough of the 3/3s, you can play them turn 5, and they trigger. It's pretty cool. But it is not automatic. The Power Suit is good for the same reason that other equipment are good, but if your opponent also has Power Stones, the ward is not relevant. The Amulet. So I put this in with the artifact because you still play this card if you care about having the body that gains the life and just have a filter later to get the white mana. It's a cool card. And it's solid. It's never like amazing, but you'll need 5 drops. And if you don't have 5 drops in your color, the Amulet is a good safe way to grab it early. Power Worker. It's a ramp creature. 3 mana, 1/3 that makes a 1, and it has reach. You play it when you have relevant 5 drops to ramp into, but it is not itself good enough. There's also assembly work synergies at rare that make this card good. Transmigrant Altar. This is awesome. You're not going to use that first ability very often, and when you do, it's going to feel really good. But mostly this lets you turn your 1/1 soldiers or unearthed creatures into 3/3 zombies. So this is a build around and a strong one. Alright, very last card. You ready? It is Veteran's Power Blade. It is easier to have 2 powers than it is to have power stones than it is to have white mana and a soldier. It is not a card you usually want to be playing, but you want to make your flyers bigger. That's it. We're all done. We did the whole set review. So that's all the commons and uncommons. We did not do the whole set review. But I will be back Thursday night to cover the rares. And I am hungry and I can't talk anymore. Otherwise, I'd play stuff. I know I owe a few of you redeems. ADHD, if you're still here, we can do it before my next one. I think I'm like... I'll try and start early enough to hit Mythic. I liked hitting Mythic on stream, and I'll try and find time to stream Mythic. Sounds fun! I know you had some new people. Thanks for being here. I know it's always kind of weird when you see someone who you haven't watched before rate a set, because, like, what reason do you have to trust their rankings? Oh, thank you. So I'll get this uploaded to YouTube tonight or tomorrow, and I'll have my spreadsheet finished probably tomorrow. I'm going to upload my spreadsheet so anybody can use it just as a general set of rankings. But what I like to do is keep a spreadsheet of these rankings and then update them over time, because you can learn a lot about what we figure out over time. Like, what we figure out to change will help us with future sets. If you liked this and you want more help with drafting in general, feel free to drop my Discord. But I try to keep everything educational. And I will see everybody on Thursday. So Thursday I'm finishing my set review. Friday is my multi-draft, so I'll be doing 4 drafts simultaneously. And then next Sunday is my first subscriber tournament. So that'll be Peasant Cube, and there will be fabulous prizes. Thanks for coming by, everybody. That was a lot of fun. Let's see who